You've been lied to about who you are. They told you the version of you they knew is the real one, that you must stay familiar to stay loved, that changing means losing yourself. But if that were true, why does the old identity feel like clothes that no longer fit? Why do old roles feel exhausting to perform? Why do you feel a quiet distance from the person you used to be? The truth is, the version of you they knew no longer exists. You are not meant to stay frozen in someone else's memory. You are meant to change, to awaken, to outgrow the life that once defined you, and Buddhist teachings reveal why this transformation is not loss, but liberation. For centuries, the wisest minds understood that suffering begins when we cling to a fixed self in a world that never stops moving. Not through force, not through rebellion, but through awareness, the kind that lets you release who you were without fear of who you are becoming. Tonight, as you listen, something will loosen inside you. You will stop trying to return to the person others remember. The pressure to be understood will fade. A calm strength will take its place. And when you wake up tomorrow, you will see clearly that becoming unrecognizable was never betrayal. It was evolution. This isn't just another audio to fall asleep to. This is the moment you accept that you are allowed to change, even if no one else understands. Are you ready? Let's begin. Something inside you went quiet after that realization. Not peaceful quiet, not relief, but the kind of silence that follows when a truth finally lands and there is no way to argue with it anymore. You can't go back to being who you were, but the world around you hasn't caught up yet. People are still speaking to the old version of you, still expecting the same reactions, the same tolerance, the same personality that once kept everything predictable. And now you're standing in between two identities. The one that is already gone and the one that is still forming. This is where the grieving begins. It doesn't look like grief at first. There are no ceremonies for it, no clear moment where everyone acknowledges what was lost. It shows up in small, confusing ways. A conversation that suddenly feels heavy. A joke that no longer feels funny. A situation you used to tolerate that now drains you in minutes. You start noticing how much effort it takes to act like your former self, like wearing a costume that once fit perfectly but now feels tight across your chest. And the hardest part is that no one else can see the discomfort. From the outside, you look the same. Inside, everything has shifted. Grieving the identity others still expect is a strange kind of loss, because the person you're mourning is still technically alive. It's you. You remember how that version of you thought, what they feared, what they tolerated to stay loved. You understand why you became that person. At some point, it kept you safe. It helped you belong. It prevented conflict. It allowed you to survive environments that required you to shrink in order to stay included. So when you begin to let that identity fall away, it can feel like you're betraying the very strategy that carried you through life. Buddhist teachings speak of impermanence, but this is where the lesson becomes personal. Impermanence is not just about seasons changing or people aging. It is about identities dissolving. The self you performed was never permanent, only useful for a certain time. When the conditions that created it change, the identity naturally weakens. But the mind resists this process because it confuses familiarity with safety. Even if the old personality brought pain, it was predictable pain. And predictable pain feels easier to manage than the uncertainty of becoming someone new. One of the most painful parts of this grieving is the pressure to keep performing for others. People don't always demand it directly. Sometimes it comes through subtle disappointment in their voice when you respond differently. Sometimes it shows up as confusion when you don't laugh at the same things. Sometimes it appears as guilt, as if your growth is an inconvenience to those who preferred you unchanged. You start to notice how relationships can be built around roles rather than genuine connection. The helper, the peacemaker, the quiet one, the strong one, the one who never complains. When you stop playing the role, the relationship itself feels unstable, as if it depended more on your function than your presence. There is also fear mixed into the grief. If you stop being who they expect, will they still stay? Will they still love you? Will you lose the place you once had in their lives? This fear can tempt you to step back into the old personality just to restore harmony. You might catch yourself apologizing for boundaries that are actually healthy. You might explain yourself too much, hoping they will understand and allow the new you to exist without tension. But explanation rarely solves this kind of problem because the issue is not misunderstanding, it is attachment. They are attached to who you were. And you might still be attached to being seen as that person. Letting go of the pressure to perform begins quietly. It starts with noticing when you are acting instead of living. A moment where you say yes, even though your body wants to say no. A laugh that feels forced. A silence that hides your true opinion. Each of these moments becomes a doorway to awareness. Buddhism teaches that awareness dissolves suffering because it reveals what is actually happening instead of what we pretend is happening. Once you see that you are performing, it becomes harder to keep pretending without feeling the cost. Another layer of grief appears when you realize that some people only felt comfortable with the wounded version of you. They understood you when you were struggling because your pain made you relatable. Your healing creates distance because it removes the dynamic that once connected you. This realization can feel lonely. You might question whether growth is worth the separation it creates, but the alternative would be staying wounded to preserve connection, and that is a quiet form of self-abandonment. There is also a sense of disorientation that comes with shedding an identity. If you are no longer who you were, who are you now? Without the familiar personality traits that defined you, you might feel empty for a while. This emptiness is not a sign of failure. It is space, a clearing where something more authentic can emerge. But the mind often interprets this space as loss, not possibility. It wants immediate certainty, a new label, a new story to hold on to. Buddhism encourages staying in the uncertainty long enough for clarity to grow naturally, rather than forcing a new identity too quickly. You may notice memories surfacing during this grieving process. Moments where the old identity was shaped. Times when you learned that being quiet kept the peace, that being agreeable prevented rejection, that being strong meant suppressing your needs. These memories are not returning to hurt you. They are surfacing so you can see the origin of the persona you carried. Compassion becomes essential here. Instead of judging your past self for not knowing better, you begin to appreciate the intelligence behind those survival strategies. They were not weaknesses, they were adaptations. As you continue letting go, you may feel waves of doubt. The mind might whisper that you are becoming selfish or distant. It might romanticize the past, highlighting the moments when everything seemed simpler. But simplicity is not always truth. Sometimes it was simple because you were suppressing parts of yourself that didn't fit the narrative others expected. True peace comes from integration, not performance. Relationships will start to reveal their foundations during this time. Some will adapt and grow with you, others will resist, trying to pull you back into familiar patterns. You will see clearly who is connected to your essence and who is connected to your role. This clarity can hurt, but it also prevents future confusion. Instead of guessing who truly sees you, you begin to recognize it through their response to your change. There will also be moments of relief, even in the middle of grief. Small experiences where you realize how much energy you used to spend maintaining the old identity. A conversation where you speak honestly and nothing terrible happens. A decision made without consulting everyone else's expectations. These moments feel quiet but powerful, like stepping into fresh air after years in a crowded room. The pressure to perform fades gradually, not overnight. Some days you will slip back into old habits because they are deeply conditioned. That is not failure. It is part of the unwinding process. Each time you notice it and return to authenticity, the old pattern weakens. Buddhism describes this as unlearning rather than learning, removing what was layered on top of your natural state. Eventually, the grief begins to soften. You realize you are not losing yourself. You are losing the mask that hid you. The sadness transforms into a calm acceptance that people will remember you differently than you see yourself now, and that is okay. Their memory belongs to them. Your life belongs to you. You may also develop compassion for those who struggle with your change, not because you need their approval, but because you understand how unsettling transformation can feel when someone else initiates it. Your evolution can remind them of their own stagnation, their own fears of change. This understanding prevents bitterness from taking root. You don't need to convince them. You simply continue walking your path. Over time, a quiet confidence replaces the need to be recognized. You stop waiting for permission to be who you are becoming. The grief dissolves into gratitude for the journey that brought you here. Even the old identity, with all its limitations, becomes something you honor rather than resent. It carried you to the point where you could finally release it. What remains is a sense of alignment that cannot be performed. It is not loud or dramatic. It feels steady, grounded, real. You no longer feel the urge to return to the person others remember because you see clearly that doing so would be a step away from yourself. The version of you they knew served its purpose. It was never meant to be permanent. And as this realization settles, something unexpected happens. The need to explain your change disappears. You no longer feel obligated to justify why you are different. You understand that transformation is not something that requires approval to be valid. It simply unfolds, like seasons shifting without asking permission from the trees. This is the quiet freedom that follows the grief, not the absence of sadness, but the presence of truth. You stop performing. You stop apologizing for evolving. You stop carrying the emotional weight of expectations that no longer belong to you. And in that space, a new identity begins to form, not one designed to please others, but one that reflects who you are when nothing is forced. The process is slow, almost invisible, but deeply real. You are not becoming someone else. You are becoming someone closer to yourself than you have ever been. The grief was not a sign that something went wrong. It was proof that something real was changing. As the weight of performing an identity you no longer needed began to fall away, a strange space opened in your life. It wasn't relief yet. It wasn't peace either. It felt more like standing in a doorway after closing the room behind you, only to realize you don't fully belong in the next one yet. The grief of letting go quietly turned into distance, not just from who you were, but from the places and people that once felt like home. This is where transformation reveals its hidden cost. Growth doesn't just remove old masks, it changes where you can breathe comfortably. At first, the loneliness is subtle. It doesn't arrive as dramatic isolation. It shows up in moments that used to feel normal. You sit in a familiar space and something feels off, as if the emotional temperature has changed, but no one else notices. Conversations repeat patterns you no longer resonate with. Topics that once held your attention now feel shallow or exhausting. You find yourself quieter, not because you have nothing to say, but because what matters to you has shifted beyond the room's language. Outgrowing familiar environments is one of the most disorienting experiences a person can face, because it removes the illusion of belonging without immediately providing a new one. These rooms were once your shelter. They held your routines, your history, your shared references with others. But transformation alters your inner world first, long before your outer world rearranges itself. So you begin to move through spaces that still look the same, while feeling entirely different inside. This loneliness is not the result of rejection, it is the result of misalignment. You are not being pushed out. You simply no longer fit the emotional architecture of the room. The values that once kept you connected may now conflict with the clarity you have gained. What once felt comforting can begin to feel restrictive, like trying to breathe through fabric pressed too tightly against your face. There is also confusion because nothing obvious has changed externally. The same people are present, the same walls surround you, the same jokes circulate, yet your internal response has shifted so dramatically that it feels as though you have entered a parallel version of your own life. This is why personal transformation often feels like exile. You didn't leave intentionally. You woke up different and discovered the map no longer matches the terrain. Buddhist teachings describe this stage as part of awakening. When awareness expands, ignorance begins to dissolve, and with it the unconscious agreements that once kept relationships and environments stable. You start noticing dynamics that used to pass unnoticed. Patterns of control, avoidance, superficiality, emotional dependency. These realizations can create distance because awareness changes participation. You can no longer engage in the same way without feeling the tension between truth and habit. The exile feeling deepens when you attempt to reconnect and realize the effort is draining. You try to re-enter conversations, to act natural, to blend back in, but it feels like translating yourself into a language you no longer speak fluently. You leave interactions feeling tired rather than nourished. This is a sign that your nervous system has recalibrated to seek authenticity instead of familiarity. Loneliness in this phase is often mistaken for a problem to fix quickly. You might feel tempted to fill the silence with noise, to return to old distractions, to surround yourself with people, even if the connection is thin. But this loneliness has a purpose. It creates space for a new sense of self to stabilize without being pulled back into old patterns. If you rush to escape it, you risk rebuilding the same environment that no longer supports your growth. There is also a mourning for the comfort that used to exist. Even if the old room was limiting, it was known. There is security in predictability, even when it is unhealthy. Leaving that behind means stepping into uncertainty, and uncertainty triggers fear. The mind prefers a painful certainty over an unfamiliar possibility because at least pain can be anticipated. Freedom, on the other hand, cannot be fully predicted, and that unpredictability feels like danger to a mind trained by habit. Another layer of loneliness comes from the realization that not everyone will follow you into this new phase. Some people will remain exactly where they are, not because they don't care about you, but because their journey is different. You might wish they could see what you see, feel what you feel, grow alongside you. But growth cannot be forced or transferred. Each person awakens at their own pace, and sometimes paths that once ran parallel begin to diverge quietly. This divergence can feel like loss even when no conflict occurs. You may still care deeply about these people. You may still share history and affection, but the energy that once connected you begins to thin. Visits feel shorter. Conversations feel less satisfying. The silence afterward feels louder. It becomes clear that connection built on past versions of yourself cannot fully sustain the present one. During this exile phase, you may also encounter the fear that you will never find a place where you truly belong again. The mind starts creating stories. Maybe you changed too much. Maybe you became too distant. Maybe you lost something essential. Buddhism addresses this fear by reminding us that belonging is not found in rooms, but in awareness. When you become at home within yourself, the environment becomes less threatening. The exile dissolves into solitude, and solitude becomes fertile rather than empty. Solitude is different from loneliness. Loneliness feels like absence. Solitude feels like presence without distraction. As you spend time in this quieter space, you begin to hear your own thoughts more clearly. You notice what genuinely interests you, what energizes you, what no longer deserves your time. This self-knowledge could not have developed in the noise of the old environment because it required silence to surface. You also start to rebuild your relationship with yourself. For years, your identity may have been shaped by external feedback, how others reacted to you, what they expected, what roles you played. Without constant interaction reinforcing those roles, you begin to discover who you are without an audience. This discovery can feel both liberating and unsettling. Freedom without structure requires trust in your own judgment. Gradually, signs of a new life begin to appear. You encounter conversations that feel refreshing instead of exhausting. You meet people who respond to your authenticity with curiosity rather than discomfort. You find spaces where silence is not awkward, where depth is welcomed, where presence matters more than performance. These encounters may be rare at first, but they confirm that the exile was temporary, not permanent. You also learn to stop measuring connection by quantity. Instead of needing many people around you, you begin to value the quality of presence. A single, genuine conversation can feel more fulfilling than hours spent in superficial interaction. Your tolerance for empty engagement decreases because you now understand the cost of abandoning yourself for the sake of company. There is a quiet strength that develops during this period. You become less reactive to opinions, less desperate for validation, less afraid of being misunderstood. You realize that belonging does not require shrinking or pretending. It requires alignment between your inner world and your outer life. When that alignment exists, even a small circle can feel expansive. Eventually, what once felt like exile begins to resemble freedom. You move through spaces without needing them to define you. You can enter familiar rooms without being pulled back into old roles because your sense of self no longer depends on the environment. The loneliness fades not because you returned to who you were, but because you stopped resisting who you became. This transformation teaches a profound lesson. Sometimes you must lose the feeling of home in order to build one that is real. Familiarity is not the same as belonging. Familiarity can exist even in places that limit you. True belonging grows in spaces where you can exist without disguise. When you look back at this period, you may realize it was one of the most important transitions of your life. It forced you to choose authenticity over comfort, depth over convenience, truth over nostalgia. It showed you that growth is not just about gaining new qualities, but about releasing environments that cannot contain the person you are becoming. And in the quiet that remains, you understand something that once seemed impossible. Exile was never the destination. It was the bridge between who you were and the freedom you were moving toward. Freedom began to feel possible once the loneliness softened, but a quieter obstacle was still waiting. You could step into new spaces, speak differently, choose differently, yet something invisible kept pulling at your sleeve. Not a place, not a person standing in front of you, but a memory living inside others. You started noticing how people spoke to you as if time had stopped, as if the person you used to be was still standing right there in front of them. This is where transformation meets resistance that doesn't come from the present at all, but from the past refusing to loosen its grip. It hurts in a very specific way when someone describes you using words that no longer feel true. They talk about who you were as if it is still accurate, repeating stories that freeze you in a version of yourself you quietly outgrew. At first, you might smile and nod, not wanting to create discomfort. But inside, something tightens. You feel unseen, not because they don't care, but because they are looking at an old photograph while you are standing there in motion. Other people's nostalgia can feel warm on the surface. It can sound affectionate, even loving. They remember your old habits, your old reactions, your old vulnerabilities. They tell stories about you that once felt familiar. Yet nostalgia has a shadow side. it turns living people into fixed characters. It edits out growth, complexity, and pain, leaving only the parts that fit a comforting narrative. When you are the subject of that narrative, it can feel like being placed inside a glass case, where everyone admires who you used to be while ignoring who you are becoming. This quiet imprisonment often goes unnoticed because it doesn't look hostile. No one is trying to hurt you. They simply hold on to memories because those memories are part of their own identity. The version of you they remember is tied to how they understood their world at that time. If you change, it forces them to reconsider their own story. So without realizing it, they keep relating to you in the way that preserves their sense of stability. You may notice this in conversations where people respond to you based on your old personality rather than your current words. You express a boundary, and they laugh as if you are joking because the old you never set boundaries. You share a new perspective, and they dismiss it because they still see you as the person who once doubted themselves. They might even bring up your past mistakes repeatedly, not out of cruelty, but because those mistakes are part of the image they have stored. Buddhist teachings speak about attachment not only to things, but to ideas of self. This includes the ideas other people hold about you. Their attachment becomes a subtle pressure on your present moment. It tempts you to behave in ways that confirm their expectations so they don't feel disoriented. You might find yourself slipping back into old speech patterns, old humor, old passivity, simply because it is easier than confronting the discomfort of being seen as unfamiliar. Memory is powerful because it carries emotion. When someone reminisces about the past, it can awaken your own nostalgia. You might start doubting whether your change was necessary. You might wonder if you lost something valuable along the way. But nostalgia rarely shows the full picture. It highlights the pleasant fragments and blurs the pain that led to transformation in the first place. What feels like longing for simpler times is often longing for a time when you didn't yet know what you know now. This is why being frozen in someone else's memory can feel suffocating. It asks you to deny your own evolution to preserve their comfort. It invites you to perform a role that no longer aligns with your awareness. Over time, this performance becomes exhausting because it splits your energy. Part of you is trying to stay authentic while another part is trying to maintain harmony. You might start avoiding certain people or situations because you anticipate being pulled back into that past role. Not because you dislike them, but because interacting feels like stepping into a time capsule. You leave feeling drained, as if you spent hours pretending to be someone else. This avoidance can create guilt, especially if the people involved were important in your life. You question whether distancing yourself is selfish, even though staying connected in the old way feels dishonest. Another challenge appears when people resist acknowledging your growth. They may respond defensively when you act differently, interpreting your change as judgment or rejection. Your calm may feel threatening to someone used to your emotional reactivity. Your independence may feel like abandonment to someone who relied on your availability. Their reaction is less about you and more about the shift in the dynamic they depended on. Understanding this does not eliminate the pain, but it prevents resentment from taking root. You begin to see that their nostalgia is not an attack. It is a form of clinging, driven by fear of losing what felt familiar. Compassion becomes possible when you recognize that they are also grieving, even if they cannot articulate it. They are losing the version of you that helped them feel secure. At the same time, compassion does not require self-betrayal. You can acknowledge their memories without stepping back into the role they expect. This balance takes practice. It involves responding from your present awareness while allowing them time to adjust. Some will eventually see you clearly. Others may continue relating to the past version indefinitely. Your peace cannot depend on their ability to update their perception. Buddhism teaches that identity is fluid, a process rather than a fixed entity. When you internalize this truth, you stop feeling obligated to remain consistent with someone else's memory. You understand that their image of you belongs to their mind, not to your life. You are free to change, even if the change is inconvenient for others. Letting go of the need to be remembered accurately is a turning point. It releases you from the invisible contract that says you must behave in ways that confirm the past. You accept that some people will always think of you as who you were, and that is not something you need to correct. Trying to manage everyone's perception would consume the energy needed to live authentically. There is also relief in recognizing that you are not responsible for maintaining someone else's nostalgia. Their memories are part of their journey, just as your transformation is part of yours. When you stop trying to reconcile the two, a sense of spaciousness appears. You can appreciate the shared history without being trapped inside it. You may still feel moments of sadness when you realize that certain connections cannot evolve with you. The stories you once shared may no longer carry the same meaning. The bond that depended on a specific version of you may fade. This is not a failure of love. It is a reflection of impermanence. Relationships, like identities, change form over time. As you continue forward, new relationships begin to form that are rooted in who you are now rather than who you were. These connections feel lighter because they do not require you to explain your growth or justify your differences. There is mutual curiosity instead of assumption, presence instead of projection. Eventually, the sense of imprisonment dissolves. You stop reacting to being seen as your past self because you no longer feel defined by it. Their nostalgia becomes background noise rather than a force shaping your behavior. You can listen to old stories about yourself without feeling pulled back into them. This freedom does not erase your history, it integrates it. You carry your past as knowledge rather than identity. The roles you once played become chapters rather than cages. You can revisit them without becoming them again. In this clarity, you understand something deeply reassuring. Memory can freeze images, but it cannot stop movement. You are not required to live according to someone else's snapshot. Your life unfolds in real time, guided by awareness rather than nostalgia. The quiet strength that emerges here prepares you for the next phase of transformation, where you learn to walk forward without needing everyone to follow or understand. The past loosens its grip, and the present finally feels wide enough to hold the person you are becoming. As the grip of memory began to loosen and you stopped trying to live inside other people's snapshots of you, a new tension quietly surfaced. It wasn't about who they thought you were anymore. It was about who you once promised yourself you would be. Old dreams, old loyalties, old plans, all waiting patiently in the background, expecting you to follow through. You started to notice that growth doesn't just distance you from people. It can distance you from the life you once believed you were supposed to live. And this is where a different kind of courage becomes necessary. There is a particular sadness that comes from realizing you are no longer aligned with paths you once fought hard to walk. Goals that once gave you identity now feel hollow. Relationships that once felt permanent now feel like chapters that quietly closed. Even beliefs about what success or happiness should look like begin to dissolve. You may catch yourself wondering when exactly the shift happened, because it rarely arrives as a dramatic event. It unfolds slowly, like a landscape changing color while you are too busy surviving to notice. Disappointing old versions of your life feels uncomfortable because it challenges the idea that consistency equals integrity. You were taught to follow through, to stay loyal, to finish what you started. So when your heart moves in a different direction, it can feel like betrayal. You might worry that you are becoming unreliable or ungrateful for the opportunities you once prayed for. But growth often requires re-evaluating commitments made by a version of you who had different needs and different awareness. Silent agreements exist everywhere in life. Some were spoken openly, Others were formed through expectations that were never discussed, but always understood. You agreed to be the responsible one, the strong one, the accommodating one, the one who keeps everything stable. You agreed to pursue certain milestones because they were considered normal or admirable. You agreed to remain in environments that shaped your identity even after you outgrew them. These agreements felt natural at the time because they aligned with who you were then. When transformation begins, those agreements start to feel heavy. Not because they were wrong, but because they belong to a past reality. Continuing to honor them would require ignoring your present truth. This is where courage becomes necessary. It is not loud or dramatic courage, it is quiet, steady courage. The willingness to accept that some expectations will not be fulfilled, some promises will not be kept in the way they were originally imagined. You may feel guilt when you step away from paths that once defined you. Guilt for changing direction, for leaving roles unfinished, for no longer being who others relied on you to be. This guilt is rooted in empathy. You care about how your choices affect others. But guilt can also keep you stuck if it prevents honest evaluation of what is actually healthy for you now. Buddhism encourages compassion balanced with wisdom, caring without abandoning clarity. Another layer of this courage involves disappointing your own past hopes. There were dreams you held on to because they represented security, recognition, or belonging. Letting go of them can feel like admitting defeat, even when the release is necessary for growth. You might question whether you gave up too soon, whether perseverance would have eventually paid off. But not every path is meant to be completed. Some exist to lead you toward awareness of what truly matters. The difficulty lies in accepting that the person who made those plans was operating with limited information. They could not foresee the experiences that would reshape your priorities. They could not anticipate the ways your values would evolve. Holding yourself accountable to their vision indefinitely would be like expecting a child's drawing to guide an architect's blueprint. It was meaningful at the time, but it cannot define the structure you are building now. There is also fear of how others will interpret your shift. They may see your change as inconsistency, instability, or lack of commitment. They may remind you of what you said you would do, what you once believed, who you used to be. Their confusion can intensify your own doubts. Yet clarity often emerges only after you allow yourself to move beyond expectations that no longer reflect your inner state. Buddhist teachings emphasize that attachment to fixed outcomes creates suffering. When you cling to a specific vision of your life, you resist the natural unfolding of experience. Accepting that plans can change is not a sign of weakness. It is a recognition of impermanence. Your life is not a contract you signed years ago. It is a living process responding to new insight. Courage in this context also means tolerating uncertainty. When you step away from familiar goals or roles, you may not immediately know what will replace them. This gap can feel frightening because it removes the structure that once guided your decisions. But the absence of a clear path can also be fertile ground for discovering possibilities that were invisible before. When you are not confined to predetermined outcomes, creativity and intuition have space to emerge. You may notice resistance from within as well as from others. Part of you wants to hold on to the old narrative because it provides a sense of continuity. Letting go feels like dissolving the story that once explained your life. But stories are tools, not prisons. They are meant to evolve as you gain new understanding. The courage to disappoint your past is the courage to update your story in real time. Relationships can shift during this process because they were built around shared expectations. When you move away from those expectations, the dynamic changes. Some people will adapt and support your evolution. Others may struggle because your change disrupts their own sense of stability. Their reaction does not determine the validity of your growth. It simply reflects their capacity to adjust. It is important to recognize that disappointing old versions of your life does not erase the value of what came before. The experiences, lessons, and connections you gained remain part of you. You are not rejecting your past. You are integrating it while allowing yourself to move forward. This distinction prevents bitterness from replacing gratitude.
There will be moments when nostalgia tempts you to return to what felt simpler. When uncertainty becomes overwhelming, the familiarity of old paths can seem comforting, but comfort alone cannot sustain fulfillment. If a direction no longer resonates, returning to it will eventually recreate the same tension that led you away. Trusting your present awareness requires patience with discomfort. As you continue, a quiet confidence begins to form. You realize that your life does not have to make sense to your past self or to those who remember you differently. The only requirement is that it aligns with your current truth. This alignment becomes a source of stability that external approval cannot provide. You also learn that disappointing expectations does not mean abandoning responsibility. It means redefining responsibility in a way that includes your well-being. You can still care deeply about others while refusing to sacrifice your growth to maintain outdated agreements. This balance is delicate, but it is essential for sustainable change. Over time, the fear of disappointing fades because you see the benefits of authenticity. Decisions become clearer. Energy that was once spent maintaining appearances becomes available for meaningful pursuits. You feel less fragmented because your actions reflect your inner state instead of contradicting it. Eventually, you understand that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. Each step away from old expectations strengthens your trust in yourself. Each honest decision reinforces the idea that your life belongs to the present, not to the past. This courage prepares you for the next stage of transformation, where compassion extends not only toward others, but toward the versions of yourself that struggled before you knew another way. Growth stops feeling like a series of losses and begins to feel like a gradual return to something more genuine. In this space, disappointment transforms into release. You are no longer trying to fulfill agreements you never consciously chose. You are living deliberately, guided by awareness rather than obligation. The past remains part of your story, but it no longer dictates the direction of your future. And with that realization, the fear of letting people down becomes less powerful than the relief of finally being honest with your own life. As you stepped further into a life guided by honesty instead of obligation, something else began to surface. A quiet realization that not everyone was reacting to your growth with resistance out of malice. Some of them were simply confused. They were not trying to hold you back. They just didn't know how to meet this version of you because the only language they had learned was the one spoken by your pain. The courage to move forward slowly opened into a softer understanding. Not everyone who struggles with your healing is against you. Some only knew how to love you when you were hurting. There is a particular kind of sadness that appears when you realize that certain people bonded with you through shared wounds. The connection was real, but it was built on survival, not wholeness. You were relatable because you were struggling. You were approachable because you needed support. You were understandable because your reactions fit a story they recognized. When healing begins, the story changes, and they no longer know their role in it. This does not mean the relationship was false. It means it was shaped by circumstances that no longer exist. Pain has a way of creating intimacy quickly. When two people recognize the same hurt in each other, it forms a bridge that feels strong because it is rooted in vulnerability. But when one person starts to heal, the bridge changes. The shared language of suffering fades, and without realizing it, both people can feel lost. Some may respond by trying to pull you back into the old dynamic. They might bring up painful memories repeatedly, as if reminding you of who you were will restore the connection. Others might become distant because your calm feels unfamiliar, even unsettling.
Your stability may highlight their own unresolved struggles, and that contrast can create discomfort they don't know how to process. Buddhist teachings emphasize compassion not only for those who hurt us, but also for those who cannot understand us. Everyone moves at their own pace through awareness. Just as you once lived in patterns you now recognize as limiting, others are still navigating their own journeys. Seeing this clearly allows you to replace frustration with patience. Compassion does not mean returning to a wounded state to make others comfortable. It means recognizing that their reaction comes from confusion rather than rejection. They are adjusting to a version of you that no longer fits their expectations, and adjustment takes time. Some will learn to relate to you in a new way. Others may not. Compassion allows you to accept both outcomes without bitterness. There can also be grief for the simplicity that existed when you were hurting together. Shared struggle created a sense of unity. Healing can feel isolating because it changes the emotional balance. You may find yourself wanting to help them the way they once helped you, but healing cannot be forced. Offering support without trying to fix them becomes the most respectful approach. It is important to understand that your healed state may feel distant to someone who is still in pain. Not because you stopped caring, but because you no longer operate from the same emotional frequency. Where you once reacted with intensity, you now respond with calm. Where you once sought reassurance, you now rely on inner stability. This difference can feel like separation, even when love remains. Compassion also involves forgiving yourself for not being able to meet everyone where they are. You may wish you could carry others with you, ensure they never feel left behind. But growth is not something that can be transferred like an object. Each person must walk through their own experiences to reach understanding. Your role is not to rescue, but to remain kind while honoring your boundaries. Some people may interpret your healing as indifference. They might say you changed too much, became too distant, forgot where you came from. These statements often reflect their fear of losing the connection that existed before. Responding defensively will not resolve this fear. Responding with calm acknowledgement can ease the tension without compromising your progress. There is also a deeper layer of compassion that develops when you realize you were once in their position. There was a time when you could not understand someone else's growth either. You may have felt abandoned when others moved forward. Remembering this prevents judgment from replacing empathy. It reminds you that confusion is part of the human experience, not a flaw. Your healed presence can still offer comfort even if it feels unfamiliar. Stability has a quiet influence. Over time, some may begin to trust the calm you embody. They may see that healing did not erase your humanity. It simply allowed you to express it without the distortion of pain. This gradual recognition can rebuild connection in a healthier form. However, compassion also requires accepting that some relationships will remain rooted in the past. Not every bond can evolve. Letting go without resentment becomes an act of kindness toward both yourself and the other person. You release them from the expectation to change while freeing yourself from the pressure to stay the same. As you continue forward, you learn to hold space for different emotional realities without absorbing them. You can listen without becoming overwhelmed. You can care without sacrificing your equilibrium. This balance is a sign that healing has reached a level where it no longer depends on external harmony. You may also discover new ways to connect that do not rely on shared suffering. Conversations about growth, creativity, presence, or simple everyday experiences can replace discussions centered on pain. These connections feel lighter because they are not anchored in survival mode. They allow joy to become part of the relationship. Compassion transforms the narrative from separation to understanding. Instead of seeing yourself as someone who left others behind, you begin to see yourself as someone who walked a path that is open to anyone willing to take it. Your healing becomes a quiet invitation rather than a dividing line. There is peace in knowing that you do not need everyone to relate to your present self for it to be valid. Recognition is not a requirement for authenticity. Your journey does not lose meaning simply because it is not understood by all. Trusting this truth allows you to move without carrying unnecessary guilt. Over time, you stop measuring relationships by how closely others mirror your state. You appreciate differences without feeling threatened by them. You can love people at various stages of awareness while remaining grounded in your own. This flexibility reflects a deeper maturity that sees growth as a continuous process rather than a destination. Eventually, compassion circles back to yourself. You recognize the strength it took to heal, the vulnerability it required, the uncertainty you endured. Instead of minimizing your progress to maintain connection, you honor it quietly. Self-respect becomes the foundation from which genuine compassion flows. In this understanding, the distance between you and those who only knew your wounded self feels less painful. It becomes part of the natural unfolding of life. Some people meet us in certain chapters and not others. Their presence was meaningful, even if it was temporary. Appreciating that meaning without clinging to permanence allows you to carry the connection without being bound by it. As this perspective settles, your heart feels lighter, not because everyone now understands you, but because you no longer need them to. Compassion dissolves the tension between past and present. It replaces the urge to explain with the willingness to accept. And in that acceptance, you become capable of relating to others from a place that is no longer shaped by wounds, but by awareness. This is where healing stops being something you guard and becomes something you quietly embody, influencing the world around you without effort. As compassion settled into your heart and you stopped expecting others to understand your transformation, a deeper realization quietly emerged. It did not come as comfort. It came as clarity, the kind that rearranges everything you thought was still possible. You began to see that even if you wanted to return to the life you once knew, something essential had changed. Not the world around you, but the way you see it. And once vision changes, the past stops being a place you can live in. It becomes a memory you can visit but never inhabit again. There is a moment in every transformation that feels like waking up too far from a dream to fall back asleep. At first, you might try. You might revisit old routines, reconnect with familiar places, attempt conversations that once felt natural. You hope that something inside you will switch back, that the ease you once felt will return. But instead of comfort, you feel a quiet resistance, as if your inner world refuses to cooperate with the script. This resistance is not stubbornness. It is awareness refusing to shrink. The shock comes from realizing that change is not reversible in the way we imagine. We grow up believing that if something doesn't work out, we can simply go back to what existed before. But awareness does not work like that. Once you see clearly, the illusion dissolves. You cannot unknow what you know. You cannot unfeel what you have felt. You cannot return to ignorance after tasting understanding. Buddhist teachings describe this as awakening from delusion, not in a dramatic sense, but in a gradual one. You begin to notice the patterns that once controlled you. You see how fear shaped your decisions, how attachment kept you stuck, how approval influenced your sense of worth. These insights create distance between you and the person who operated without questioning those forces. Returning would require pretending you never learned these lessons, and the mind cannot convincingly maintain that illusion for long. The past may still call to you during moments of uncertainty. When the new path feels unclear, nostalgia offers a comforting alternative. It presents an edited version of what used to be, highlighting familiarity while minimizing the reasons you left. You might remember the warmth without the suffocation, the stability without the stagnation.
This selective memory can create the illusion that returning would solve your discomfort, but when you step closer, the illusion dissolves. The same environment that once felt safe now feels constricting. The conversations repeat without depth. The emotional dynamics remain unchanged. You realize that what you missed was not the situation itself, but the sense of certainty it provided. Certainty, even when limiting, can feel safer than freedom because it removes the burden of choice. The shock intensifies when you accept that there is no bridge back, only forward. Growth does not erase the past, but it transforms your relationship with it. The person who lived that life no longer exists in the same form. Trying to return would be like wearing clothes designed for a different body. They might still fit physically, but they no longer align with how you move. This realization can bring grief because it marks the end of a possibility you unconsciously held onto. As long as you believed you could return, you had a safety net. You could explore change without fully committing because retreat seemed available. When that option disappears, you face the full reality of transformation. There is no backup plan, only the unknown ahead. You may also feel a sense of betrayal, not toward others, but toward time itself. Why didn't anyone explain that awareness changes everything? Why didn't anyone warn you that growth can isolate you from your own history? These questions reflect the human desire for stability in a world defined by impermanence. Buddhism answers by reminding us that change is the only constant, even when we resist it. As awareness expands, your perception of meaning shifts. Activities that once seemed important may lose their appeal. Conflicts that once consumed you may appear insignificant. The urgency you once felt begins to fade, replaced by a quieter understanding of what truly matters. This shift can create distance between you and those who are still engaged in the patterns you left behind, not because you consider yourself better, but because your priorities have evolved. There is also a physical sensation to this realization. A heaviness in the chest, a tightness in the throat, a quiet fatigue that comes from processing something irreversible. Your body understands before your mind fully accepts it. It knows you are crossing a threshold that cannot be uncrossed. Allowing these feelings to surface without resistance helps the transition unfold naturally. You might question whether you would be happier if you had never changed. This thought often appears during moments of loneliness or doubt. It romanticizes the past as simpler, ignoring the dissatisfaction that initiated the journey. But happiness based on ignorance is fragile. It depends on not seeing what lies beneath the surface. Once awareness exposes the deeper layers, superficial contentment cannot sustain itself. Another aspect of the shock is realizing that not everyone will recognize your transformation. Some may still treat you as if nothing has changed, reinforcing the sense of disconnection. You might feel tempted to explain your experience, to seek validation for what you are going through. Yet words often fall short because awareness is experiential, not conceptual. It cannot be fully communicated, only lived. Gradually, acceptance begins to replace shock. You stop searching for ways to return and start exploring how to move forward with intention. The unknown becomes less threatening when you approach it with curiosity rather than fear. You begin to see that not being able to go back is not a punishment, but an invitation to create something new. Freedom emerges from this acceptance. Without the option of retreat, you invest fully in the present. You pay closer attention to what aligns with your values, what nourishes your spirit, what feels genuine rather than performative. Decisions become less about avoiding discomfort and more about honoring truth. You may also discover a deeper appreciation for impermanence. Knowing that nothing can be held permanently encourages you to engage with life more fully. Moments become precious, not because they will last, but because they will not. This perspective transforms loss into a reminder of presence rather than a source of despair. Relationships evolve as well.
Those who resonate with your awareness remain, while others fade naturally. The connections that endure feel more authentic because they are based on who you are now, not who you were. You stop trying to recreate the past and start building bonds that reflect your current understanding. There is peace in realizing that forward movement does not require certainty. You do not need to know exactly where you are going to trust that you cannot return to where you were. Trust becomes the foundation of your journey, replacing the illusion of control. Over time, the shock fades into quiet gratitude. You recognize that awareness, even when painful, is a gift. It frees you from repeating patterns that once limited your growth. It opens possibilities that were invisible before. It allows you to live with intention rather than habit. You may still visit the past through memories, but you no longer feel tempted to stay there. The memories become part of your story, not a place you long to inhabit. You carry them with understanding instead of attachment. In this clarity, you realize that return was never truly possible. Even if circumstances remained unchanged, time would have altered you in subtle ways. The idea of going back was always an illusion created by fear of the unknown. Seeing through that illusion is what transforms shock into liberation, and in that liberation, you find a quiet readiness for whatever comes next. Not because you have all the answers, but because you no longer need them to keep moving. When the shock faded and acceptance took its place, something quieter began to happen. You stopped looking over your shoulder. The past no longer felt like a door you might reopen, and the future no longer felt like something you needed to force into shape. Instead, there was a steady awareness that your life was already moving in a new direction, even if no one else had noticed yet. You didn't feel the urge to explain yourself anymore. You didn't feel the need to justify why you were different. The change was no longer an argument you had to win. It was simply a reality you were living. There is a subtle power in allowing transformation to unfold without announcing it. In the beginning of any change, there is often a desire to declare it, to tell people who you are becoming so they can understand and adjust. This impulse comes from the fear of being misinterpreted. You want reassurance that your growth will not isolate you, that others will meet you halfway if they know what is happening inside you. But as awareness deepens, you realize that not all changes need witnesses to be valid. Living your evolution quietly creates a different kind of stability. Instead of seeking approval, you focus on alignment. Your actions begin to reflect your new understanding without requiring explanation. You say no when something feels wrong, not as a statement, but as a natural response. You walk away from environments that drain you without making a speech about it. You choose differently, and over time, those choices speak more clearly than any words could. This quiet rewriting of your story can feel strange at first because you were conditioned to communicate everything. You were taught that transparency equals honesty, that others deserve to know your reasons. But there is a difference between secrecy and privacy. Secrecy hides out of fear. Privacy protects what is still forming. Some transformations are too delicate to expose to constant scrutiny. They need space to grow without being questioned at every step. Buddhist teachings emphasize the importance of right action over right speech when it comes to personal growth. Words can create attachment to identity. When you declare who you are becoming, you risk turning that identity into something rigid. Living the change keeps it fluid. It allows you to adjust naturally as you learn, without feeling bound by what you said earlier. You may notice that people begin to respond to you differently, even if you never explain why. They sense the shift in your energy. Conversations that once pulled you into drama lose their grip because you no longer feed them. Situations that once intimidated you no longer hold the same power. Your calm presence communicates boundaries more effectively than any argument. There will still be moments when others question your silence. They may ask why you are distant, why you are not as available, why you seem different. You might feel the urge to provide a detailed explanation to ease their discomfort, but sometimes the most honest response is simplicity. You do not owe a full narrative for every step of your evolution. A gentle acknowledgement without elaboration can maintain peace while preserving your space. Rewriting your story without announcing it also protects you from unnecessary conflict. Not everyone is ready to accept your growth, and explaining yourself repeatedly can drain your energy. Living quietly allows those who are receptive to adjust naturally, while those who are not may drift away without confrontation. This process reduces friction because it removes the need for persuasion. Another benefit of this approach is that it keeps your focus on the present rather than on managing perceptions. When you are busy defending your change, you are still tied to the past version of yourself. When you simply live differently, your attention remains on what matters now. This shift strengthens your sense of autonomy. There is also a deeper humility in allowing actions to speak. You do not present yourself as someone who has figured everything out. You remain open to growth because you are not attached to a declared identity. This openness creates space for continuous learning. It prevents the ego from turning transformation into a performance. You may begin to notice how much of your previous life involved explaining, justifying, negotiating your existence. Letting go of that habit can feel liberating. Conversations become simpler because you are not trying to control how you are perceived. You express what is necessary and let the rest unfold naturally. Silence can also be a form of respect for your process and for the autonomy of others. By not forcing your narrative onto them, you allow them to interpret your change in their own way. Some will see it clearly, others will misunderstand. Accepting both outcomes without anxiety reflects a deeper confidence. Over time, the story of your life begins to look different, not because you rewrote it deliberately, but because your choices redirected its path. Opportunities that align with your values appear. Relationships based on authenticity replace those based on obligation. Your environment gradually reflects the person you have become, even if you never announce the transition. There may still be moments of doubt, especially when you encounter resistance or misunderstanding. You might wonder if silence is causing distance, but distance is not always negative. It can be a natural adjustment period while others recalibrate their perception of you. Trusting this process requires patience. Buddhism teaches that attachment to identity creates suffering because it resists the fluid nature of existence. By not announcing who you are becoming, you reduce attachment. You allow yourself to evolve continuously without needing to maintain consistency for the sake of appearances. You also discover that people who truly care will focus on how you treat them rather than on explanations. Kindness, presence, and honesty communicate more than declarations. Those who value you will adapt to your growth because they are invested in your well-being, not just in familiarity. As you continue, you may feel a quiet satisfaction in knowing that your life reflects your truth without needing validation. This satisfaction is not pride. It is alignment. It comes from living in accordance with your understanding rather than with expectations. Eventually, the need to narrate your transformation disappears entirely. You realize that your story is not a fixed script, but an unfolding process. Each day adds a new layer without erasing the previous ones. You are not abandoning your past. You are integrating it into a larger perspective. This approach also allows you to remain compassionate toward those who are still attached to earlier versions of you. You do not challenge their memories aggressively because you no longer feel threatened by them. Your identity is grounded in the present, not in their perception. There is freedom in knowing that you do not have to convince anyone of your authenticity. Authenticity reveals itself over time through consistency. Your calm responses, your thoughtful decisions, your steady boundaries become the new narrative others learn to recognize.
In this quiet rewriting, you begin to experience a deeper peace. Not the dramatic peace of a resolved conflict, but the steady peace of living without internal contradiction. Your outer life gradually matches your inner clarity.
You may look back and realize that the most significant changes happened without announcements, without ceremonies, without dramatic moments. They happened in ordinary decisions made differently, repeated until they formed a new pattern. And in that realization, you understand that transformation does not need an audience to be real. It only needs your willingness to live it fully. As your story began to rewrite itself through quiet actions instead of explanations, another shift appeared that you could not ignore. People started reacting to you with uncertainty. They hesitated before speaking, as if trying to calculate which version of you would answer. Some seemed cautious, others curious, a few even uncomfortable. You realized that the consistency they once relied on was gone. You were no longer easy to predict, and that unpredictability unsettled more than just them. It unsettled you too. Because predictability had once been your proof that you were stable, trustworthy, understood. Now you were stepping into a different kind of freedom, one that did not come with familiar reassurance. There is a strange discomfort in realizing that you are no longer the person everyone can anticipate. You used to respond the same way to certain situations. You had patterns people memorized. They knew what would make you say yes, what would make you apologize, what would keep you quiet, what would draw you back even after you said you were done. These patterns created a sense of order, even if that order limited you. When those patterns break, the environment around you loses its script. Freedom without predictability can feel like walking without a map. At first, it does not feel empowering. It feels exposed. You may question whether you are becoming inconsistent or unreliable. The mind tries to pull you back toward familiar behavior because it equates consistency with safety. But true transformation often disrupts the patterns that once defined you. It is not instability. It is growth moving faster than old habits can keep up with. Buddhist teachings emphasize the fluid nature of the self. When awareness deepens, reactions become less automatic. Instead of responding from conditioning, you respond from presence. Presence cannot be predicted because it adapts to what is actually happening rather than what has happened before. This adaptability can look erratic to those who are used to your predictability, but in reality, it is a sign of freedom from mechanical behavior. You might notice this shift in small ways. Situations that once triggered anxiety now meet calm. Requests you once accepted without question now receive thoughtful consideration. Conflicts that would have escalated now dissolve because you refuse to engage in the same emotional loop. These changes make your responses less consistent in the eyes of others, but more authentic in relation to your current awareness. There is also unease because unpredictability removes the comfort of identity. If you are not the reliable peacemaker, the accommodating friend, the strong one who never needs support, then who are you? Without those roles, you may feel undefined. This undefined space can feel like instability, even though it is actually openness, the ability to respond without being constrained by expectations. Others may react strongly to this shift because your unpredictability challenges their sense of control. Predictable people are easier to manage. When someone can anticipate your reaction, they can shape their behavior accordingly. When they cannot, they must engage with you more honestly. This change can create tension because it removes the hidden agreements that once governed the relationship. You may also encounter accusations that you have changed too much. People might interpret your unpredictability as moodiness or inconsistency. They may try to diagnose your growth as a problem because it disrupts their comfort. Recognizing this reaction as fear rather than truth allows you to stay grounded. Their discomfort does not define your transformation. Freedom from predictability also means freedom from manipulation.
When your responses are no longer automatic, others cannot rely on old triggers to influence you. Guilt, pressure, flattery, or urgency lose their effectiveness because you pause before reacting. This pause creates space for choice, and choice is the foundation of autonomy. At the same time, this freedom requires responsibility. Without predictable patterns, you must rely on inner guidance rather than external cues. Decisions become more intentional because they are not dictated by habit. This responsibility can feel heavy at first because it removes excuses. You cannot say you reacted a certain way because you always do. You must acknowledge that you are choosing differently. There is also a learning curve in trusting your new responses. You may second-guess yourself, wondering if you are overcorrecting or acting impulsively. Over time, patterns of authenticity replace patterns of conditioning, and trust grows. You begin to see that unpredictability does not mean chaos. It means flexibility guided by awareness. Relationships that survive this phase often become stronger because they are based on mutual respect rather than predictability. People who value your authenticity will adjust to your evolving nature. They will engage with you as you are now, rather than as a fixed character. This dynamic creates a more honest connection, even if it requires patience. Some relationships may fade because they depended on your consistency in roles that no longer exist. This fading is not a failure. It reflects the natural process of alignment. Connections that cannot adapt to your growth were tied to patterns you outgrew. Letting them go creates space for interactions that support your present self. You may also notice a deeper sense of aliveness emerging from this unpredictability. Without rigid scripts, life feels less repetitive. You experience situations freshly rather than through the filter of expectation. This freshness can bring excitement but also vulnerability because it removes the illusion of control. Buddhism teaches that clinging to certainty creates suffering because reality is inherently uncertain. Embracing unpredictability aligns you with this truth. Instead of resisting change, you move with it. This movement reduces internal conflict because you are no longer trying to freeze life into familiar shapes. The uneasy part of this freedom gradually softens as you recognize its benefits. You become less afraid of the unknown because you trust your ability to respond to whatever arises. Confidence shifts from controlling outcomes to navigating them. This shift reduces anxiety because it removes the need to anticipate every possibility. You also develop greater compassion for others' discomfort. You understand that unpredictability can feel threatening when someone relies on stability to feel secure. This understanding allows you to respond gently rather than defensively. You do not need to convince them of your growth. Your consistent presence, even within unpredictability, will speak over time. As your life continues to unfold, unpredictability becomes less noticeable to you because it feels natural. You stop comparing your current behavior to past patterns. You simply act in accordance with your awareness. This ease reflects integration, the point where change no longer feels like effort. Eventually, what once felt unsettling becomes a source of quiet pride. You recognize that your inability to be easily predicted means you are no longer trapped by conditioning. You are responding to life as it is, not as it was. This responsiveness allows for deeper engagement with the present moment. In this state, freedom does not feel like rebellion. It feels like alignment. You are not unpredictable for the sake of defiance. You are unpredictable because you are no longer performing a fixed identity. Each moment invites a fresh response, and you trust yourself to meet it honestly. And in that trust, the uneasy freedom transforms into a steady confidence that does not depend on being understood. As unpredictability settled into something steady and you stopped measuring yourself against who you used to be, another quiet threshold appeared. It was not about how others saw you anymore. It was about who you were when no one was watching at all, without the familiar reactions, without the reminders of your past roles, without the people who knew your history.
You were left alone with something both liberating and unsettling, your own presence. And in that silence, a question surfaced that no one else could answer for you. There is a unique vulnerability in being alone without witnesses to your past. For years, your identity was reinforced through interaction. People remembered your stories, reflected your habits back to you, reminded you of the roles you played. Their presence created continuity, a sense that you were still the same person because they treated you as such. When those witnesses are absent, continuity dissolves. You are not required to perform any version of yourself, and that freedom can feel disorienting. At first, the absence of witnesses might feel like relief. No expectations to meet, no need to maintain a persona, no pressure to explain your choices. But relief quickly gives way to uncertainty. Without external reference points, you may struggle to define yourself. You notice how often your sense of identity depended on feedback, approval, recognition, even conflict. Without those signals, you must rely on internal awareness, something that takes time to trust. This stage of transformation often occurs when you move into new environments, spend extended time alone, or simply withdraw from familiar social circles. The quiet allows your conditioned responses to fade, revealing patterns you did not see before. You might discover habits that belonged more to your surroundings than to your authentic preferences. Interests that once felt essential may no longer resonate when no one is there to validate them. Buddhist teachings emphasize the illusion of a fixed self. When you meet yourself without witnesses, this illusion becomes easier to see. Identity is revealed as a collection of memories, roles, and expectations rather than a permanent essence. This realization can feel unsettling because it removes the solidity you once relied on, but it also opens the possibility of redefining yourself based on present awareness rather than past conditioning. You may experience moments of emptiness during this process, not a painful emptiness, but a neutral one, like a blank page waiting to be written. This emptiness is often misunderstood as loneliness or loss of purpose. In reality, it is space, the absence of imposed narratives. Learning to sit with this space without rushing to fill it is a crucial part of self-discovery. Without witnesses, you are free to explore aspects of yourself that were suppressed before. You might experiment with new routines, new ways of thinking, new priorities. There is no audience to judge whether these changes are consistent with your past. This freedom allows for authenticity to emerge organically rather than through deliberate reinvention. However, the lack of external validation can also trigger doubt. You might wonder if your growth is real or if it only existed in contrast to others. When no one is there to acknowledge your change, it can feel invisible. This invisibility tests your commitment to authenticity. Are you still the person you have become when no one affirms it? Can you trust your inner clarity without external confirmation? Meeting yourself alone also reveals how you relate to silence. If you are accustomed to constant stimulation, the quiet can feel uncomfortable. Thoughts that were drowned out by noise begin to surface. Unresolved emotions may appear with surprising intensity. Instead of distractions to escape them, you have only awareness. This confrontation is not meant to overwhelm you, but to allow integration of experiences that were previously avoided. As you remain in this space, a deeper sense of self begins to form. It is not based on labels or roles, but on direct experience. You notice what genuinely brings you peace rather than what you were told should. You recognize your natural rhythms without adjusting them to fit expectations. You start making decisions that align with your values, even when no one is there to approve them. This self-knowledge creates a quiet confidence. Not the loud confidence of performance, but the calm assurance that you can exist without needing to prove anything. You become less reactive to opinions because your sense of identity no longer depends on being understood. Misinterpretation loses its power because it does not threaten your internal stability. You may also develop a new appreciation for solitude. What once felt like isolation begins to feel like refuge. Solitude becomes a place where you can return to yourself, recalibrate, and observe life without distortion. This relationship with solitude reduces the fear of being alone, allowing you to choose connection rather than cling to it. When you eventually re-enter social environments, you bring this self-awareness with you. Interactions feel different because you are not seeking confirmation of who you are. You engage from presence rather than need. This shift often leads to more authentic connections, as you attract people who resonate with your current state rather than your past identity. There may still be moments when you miss the familiarity of being known. Being understood without explanation can feel comforting, but you also recognize that familiarity is not the same as authenticity. Being known for who you used to be can feel more isolating than being unknown while being true to yourself. Buddhism teaches that attachment to identity creates suffering because it resists change. Meeting yourself without witnesses helps dissolve this attachment. You learn to see identity as fluid, adapting to each moment rather than clinging to a fixed narrative. This flexibility reduces anxiety about maintaining consistency because you no longer need to defend a specific version of yourself. You may also find that creativity emerges more easily in this space. Without the pressure to conform, your mind explores possibilities freely. Ideas that once felt impractical or unconventional become worth considering. This creative energy reflects the release of constraints imposed by external expectations. Over time, you develop trust in your ability to navigate life independently of constant feedback. This trust does not make you indifferent to connection, but it prevents dependence on it. Relationships become choices rather than necessities, enhancing their quality. The most profound realization in this stage is that you are capable of being both alone and complete. Not perfect, not finished, but whole enough to stand without leaning on familiar structures. This wholeness is not something others can give or take away. It arises from understanding yourself beyond the roles you played. As you continue forward, you may notice that the need to revisit the past decreases. You carry your history without being defined by it. Encounters with people who knew your previous self no longer trigger confusion because you know who you are regardless of their perception. Eventually, meeting yourself without witnesses transforms from a challenge into a foundation. It becomes the place you return to whenever life feels overwhelming. A quiet center that remains steady even as circumstances change. In that center, you realize that identity does not need constant confirmation to exist. It lives in awareness, in presence, in the simple act of being fully engaged with the moment. And from that place, you step back into the world not as someone searching for themselves, but as someone who has learned how to meet themselves again and again, regardless of who is watching. After learning to meet yourself without the witnesses of your past, something else begins to change in the way you relate to unfinished stories. You realize that not every chapter will end with an explanation, not every absence will be filled with answers, and not every distance will be repaired through conversation. There are moments when life moves forward without permission from the past. At first, this feels incomplete, as if something important was left unsaid. But slowly, you start to understand that closure is not always something given by others. Sometimes it is something you grow into quietly, without anyone else even knowing it happened. There is a deep emotional tension in accepting that some situations will never be resolved externally. The mind wants clarity. It wants the final conversation, the apology, the acknowledgement that what happened mattered. Without these things, it can feel as though your experience was erased. You may replay old interactions, imagining different outcomes, searching for a sentence that could have changed everything. This looping is not weakness. It is the mind's attempt to restore balance when it feels incomplete. Yet internal closure begins when you recognize that waiting for someone else to provide resolution keeps you tied to their willingness to engage. As long as you depend on their participation, your healing remains conditional. Silent closure shifts the focus inward. Instead of asking what they will say, you ask what you need to understand to move forward. This question opens a different path, one that does not rely on cooperation from the outside. Buddhist teachings often speak about attachment to outcomes as a source of suffering. Wanting a specific conversation, a specific response, or a specific apology creates resistance when reality does not deliver it. Letting go of that attachment does not mean the experience did not matter. It means you refuse to let unresolved external factors dictate your internal state. There is also grief in this process. Letting go without explanation can feel like abandoning a part of your story. You may worry that moving on silently invalidates your feelings or minimizes what happened. But internal closure is not denial. It is acknowledgement without dependence. You allow the experience to exist without requiring it to be completed in a particular way. Sometimes the absence of conversation is itself the answer. When someone chooses not to engage, they communicate their limits, even if they never articulate them. Recognizing this can be painful, but it also clarifies where you stand. You stop waiting for a version of them that may never appear. Acceptance replaces expectation. Silent closure also involves forgiving yourself for what you did not know at the time. The past often contains moments where you wish you had acted differently, spoken more clearly, or left sooner. Without external resolution, self-blame can linger. Internal closure requires compassion for your earlier self, acknowledging that you acted with the awareness you had then. As you release the need for external validation, you begin to reclaim energy that was previously spent on rumination. Thoughts about what could have been gradually lose intensity. Space opens for new experiences that are not overshadowed by unfinished business. This shift feels subtle but profound, like stepping out of a room where the air was heavy without realizing how much it was weighing on you. You may also discover that closure does not erase memory. You still remember what happened, but it no longer dominates your emotional landscape. The memory becomes a reference point rather than a wound. This transformation happens quietly, often without a specific moment you can point to. Another aspect of silent closure is accepting that not everyone will understand your perspective. There may be misunderstandings that remain unresolved, narratives that differ from your truth. Instead of fighting to correct them, you choose peace over validation. This choice reflects a deeper confidence in your own understanding. There is a paradox in this process. By not insisting on closure, you create the conditions for genuine peace. When you stop demanding resolution, the tension dissolves because there is nothing left to resist. You allow reality to be as it is, even if it is imperfect. You might notice a change in how you approach new conflicts. The urgency to resolve everything immediately decreases. You become more comfortable with uncertainty, trusting that clarity will come from awareness rather than from forcing conversation. This patience reduces reactivity and allows for more thoughtful responses. Silent closure also teaches you to recognize when continued engagement would only reopen wounds. Some conversations do not heal because the other person is not in a place to participate honestly. Walking away without final words can feel incomplete, but it protects your peace. Choosing not to reopen the past is an act of self-respect, not avoidance. As time passes, you may encounter reminders of what once felt unresolved. Instead of pulling you back into emotional turbulence, they evoke a sense of distance. You see how far you have come. The situation that once consumed your thoughts now feels like a chapter from a different life. There is also a quiet strength in knowing that you can create your own sense of completion. You do not need a ceremony or acknowledgement. Your decision to move forward becomes the closing statement. This autonomy reduces vulnerability to external disruptions because your peace is not dependent on cooperation.
Buddhism teaches that everything is impermanent, including relationships, roles, and conflicts. Internal closure aligns with this understanding. You accept that life will not pause to tie every loose end. Some threads remain unfinished, not because they were unimportant, but because life continues to unfold beyond them. You may also feel compassion for those who could not provide closure. Recognizing their limitations does not excuse harmful behavior, but it releases you from resentment. You understand that people act according to their own awareness, which may not include the capacity for resolution. Over time, silent closure becomes less about letting go of others and more about returning to yourself. You invest your attention in what is present rather than what is absent. This reorientation brings a sense of stability that external resolution could never guarantee. There is a moment when you realize that you are no longer waiting, no longer checking for messages, no longer rehearsing what you would say if the opportunity appeared. That moment does not feel dramatic. It feels ordinary, almost unnoticed, like waking up one day and realizing the weight is gone. In that ordinary moment, you understand that closure was not something you received, it was something you allowed. By choosing not to hold on to unfinished expectations, you created space for peace to settle naturally. And as you continue forward, you carry the quiet knowledge that not every ending needs words to be real. As silent closure settled into your life and you stopped waiting for unfinished conversations to complete themselves, you began to notice something even more revealing. The distance you created did not affect everyone equally. Some people remained present, adjusting naturally to your peace. Others faded away, as if the connection had been tied to something that no longer existed. At first, this felt confusing, even painful. You wondered if you had done something wrong, if your growth had somehow pushed people away. But slowly, a clearer understanding began to form. Not every relationship was built to survive your healing. Some were anchored in the version of you that needed them in a very specific way. There is a difficult realization that comes when you begin to feel stronger inside. You start to see how certain bonds were sustained, not by mutual understanding, but by imbalance. When you were struggling, uncertain, or hurting, those relationships had a defined role. They offered advice, comfort, distraction, or control. Your pain created a structure that kept the connection active. Once that pain began to fade, the structure lost its purpose. At first, you may try to preserve the relationship by recreating old patterns. You might downplay your progress, speak about your life as if nothing has changed, or avoid topics that reflect your growth. This effort comes from loyalty and fear of loss, but it also reveals how much of the connection depended on your suffering being visible. When authenticity replaces performance, tension appears because the dynamic no longer fits. Buddhist teachings often describe attachment as clinging to conditions that are constantly changing. Some relationships are attached to the conditions of your pain because it gave them a clear identity. When the condition changes, they struggle to adapt. This does not necessarily mean the other person is malicious. It means the connection was formed around a shared experience that no longer defines you. You may notice that conversations feel different. Topics that once brought you together now feel heavy or irrelevant. Attempts to share your new perspective might be met with disinterest, skepticism, or subtle resistance. It can feel as though they prefer the version of you who was easier to relate to because you were operating from a familiar place of vulnerability. There is also a psychological comfort in being needed. When you were struggling, others could feel useful by helping you. Your healing removes that role, leaving them unsure of how to connect. This uncertainty can lead to distance because they do not know how to engage with a version of you that no longer requires rescue or reassurance. Sometimes the dependency went both ways. You might realize that you relied on certain people to validate your pain or to reinforce a narrative about yourself. As you release that narrative, the connection weakens because its foundation dissolves.
Recognizing this can be humbling. It shows that relationships are often sustained by unconscious agreements rather than conscious choice. There can also be subtle resentment from those who feel left behind by your growth. They may interpret your healing as abandonment or superiority, even if you never express it that way. Their discomfort reflects their own unresolved struggles, not your intentions. Understanding this helps you respond with compassion rather than defensiveness. It is important to acknowledge the grief that accompanies this realization. Losing connections, even those based on imbalance, can feel like losing parts of your history. These people witnessed moments of your life that shaped you. Letting go does not erase that shared past, but it does mark a transition into a different phase. Buddhism teaches that suffering arises from clinging to what is no longer aligned with reality. Holding on to relationships that require you to shrink or reopen old wounds creates inner conflict. Choosing authenticity may reduce the number of connections, but it increases their depth. Quality replaces quantity. You might begin to see which relationships are capable of evolving. These are the ones where mutual respect exists independent of roles. They do not depend on you being broken or strong, available or distant. They adapt because the connection is based on presence rather than function. Recognizing bonds that depended on your weakness is not about judging others. It is about understanding the dynamics that shaped your interactions. This understanding prevents you from repeating patterns in new relationships. You become more aware of whether a connection supports your growth or requires your stagnation. There is also empowerment in realizing that you are not obligated to maintain relationships that hinder your well-being. Loyalty does not mean self-sacrifice. True loyalty includes loyalty to your own peace. This perspective allows you to release connections without guilt, honoring what they were while accepting what they are not. As you continue forward, you may encounter moments of loneliness, not because you are alone, but because the familiar network has changed. This loneliness is transitional. It reflects the space created by letting go of connections that no longer align. In time, new relationships emerge that resonate with who you are now. You may also develop a deeper appreciation for the people who remain. Their presence feels different because it is not conditional on your state. They do not need you to be hurting to stay connected. They simply value your existence. This kind of bond feels lighter, less demanding, more genuine. There is a quiet confidence that grows from this clarity. You stop questioning whether your healing is pushing people away. Instead, you see that it is revealing what was already fragile. Growth does not destroy healthy relationships. It exposes the ones that relied on imbalance. You might even feel gratitude for those connections that could not continue. They served a purpose during a particular stage of your life. Without them, you might not have learned the lessons that led to your transformation. Recognizing their role allows you to release resentment and keep the wisdom. Over time, your understanding of connection becomes more nuanced. You no longer measure relationships by duration or intensity, but by alignment and authenticity. This shift reduces fear of loss because you trust that meaningful connections will adapt or be replaced naturally. Buddhist philosophy emphasizes compassion for all beings, including those who cannot walk the same path as you. Compassion does not require continued closeness. It allows you to wish them well from a distance while maintaining your boundaries. This balance preserves both kindness and self-respect. Eventually, you reach a point where the absence of certain relationships no longer feels like a void. It feels like clarity. Your life becomes less crowded with obligations and more focused on experiences that nurture your growth. This clarity creates room for peace to settle more deeply. You may still encounter memories that evoke nostalgia for how things used to be. Instead of pulling you back, these memories remind you of how far you have come. They become markers of transformation rather than invitations to return.
And in that understanding, you realize that relationships built on suffering cannot accompany you into wholeness because they belong to a chapter that has already closed. As you began to accept that some relationships could not follow you into wholeness, another layer of truth revealed itself. It was not only that certain bonds faded, it was that your transformation stirred something uneasy in the people who remained. Their reactions were subtle at first, a change in tone, a hesitation in their words, a distance that could not be explained by time or circumstance. You realized that becoming unrecognizable was not just disorienting for you, it was unsettling for them. Your growth had become a mirror they did not ask to face. There is a quiet tension that arises when someone evolves beyond the role others assign to them. People become comfortable with who you were because it allowed them to understand where they stood in relation to you. When that reference point disappears, uncertainty replaces familiarity. They may not consciously understand why your change makes them uneasy, but they feel the shift in balance. Growth disrupts unspoken agreements. Every relationship carries silent expectations about how each person will behave, what they will tolerate, how they will respond. When you step outside those expectations, it can feel like betrayal to those who relied on them. They might interpret your independence as rejection, your calm as indifference, your boundaries as distance. In reality, you are simply living in alignment with your new awareness. Fear often hides beneath resistance. When you become unrecognizable, others are forced to confront the possibility that change is also available to them. This realization can be uncomfortable because it highlights the gap between where they are and where they could be. Instead of addressing that discomfort internally, they may project it outward, framing your growth as unnecessary or excessive. Buddhist teachings emphasize that suffering arises from attachment to stability in a world that is constantly changing. People resist your transformation because it threatens their sense of stability. If you can change so deeply, then the permanence they rely on feels less secure. They may try to restore that stability by encouraging you to return to familiar behavior. You might hear phrases that sound supportive but carry an undertone of discomfort. Comments about how you used to be more fun, more available, more easygoing. These remarks are not always meant to diminish you, but they reveal nostalgia for the version of you that fit their expectations. Nostalgia can be comforting, but it can also prevent acceptance of who you are now. There is also fear of losing relevance. When your priorities shift, the activities or conversations that once connected you may fade. Others may worry that they no longer have a place in your life. Instead of expressing this vulnerability, they might criticize your new direction. Criticism becomes a shield against the anxiety of being left behind. Resistance can also come from misunderstanding. Transformation is often internal and gradual, invisible to those who are not experiencing it. Without context, your changes can appear sudden or irrational. People may question your decisions because they only see the outcome, not the process that led there. You may feel tempted to minimize your growth to reduce their discomfort. Pretending nothing has changed can seem like a way to preserve harmony. But this approach creates internal conflict because it requires you to deny your truth. Genuine peace cannot coexist with self-suppression. Understanding the fear behind resistance allows you to respond with compassion rather than frustration. You see that their reaction is not an attack on your identity, but an expression of their own uncertainty. This perspective reduces defensiveness and prevents escalation. At the same time, compassion does not mean compliance. You can acknowledge their discomfort without abandoning your path. Holding this balance requires patience, as both you and they adjust to the new dynamic. There may also be moments when you question whether your transformation has isolated you unnecessarily. Doubt can arise when resistance persists. But reflection often reveals that the distance existed long before your growth. It was simply masked by familiarity. Some people will eventually adapt. As they become accustomed to your new presence, their fear diminishes. They realize that your change does not threaten their value. These relationships often deepen because they evolve from habit into conscious connection. Others may remain resistant because accepting your growth would require confronting their own stagnation. Letting go of these connections can feel painful, but it creates space for relationships that support your evolution rather than challenge it. Buddhist philosophy teaches that everyone moves along their path at their own pace. Expecting others to understand your transformation immediately creates unnecessary tension. Acceptance of their timing allows you to maintain peace even when alignment is not possible. You may also discover that your unrecognizable state frees you from roles that limited your expression. Without the pressure to meet expectations, you explore aspects of yourself that were previously suppressed. This exploration strengthens your sense of authenticity. As you become more comfortable with being misunderstood, the need for approval fades. You no longer measure your growth by others' reactions. Instead, you evaluate it by the peace and clarity it brings to your life. There is a quiet empowerment in realizing that resistance is often a sign of impact. Your change disrupts patterns, challenges assumptions, and invites reflection. Even if others resist now, your example may influence them later in ways you cannot see. You may also feel gratitude for those who confront their fear and choose to grow alongside you. These individuals demonstrate that transformation can inspire connection rather than division. Their presence reinforces the possibility of shared evolution. Over time, becoming unrecognizable feels less like a loss of identity and more like an expansion. You are not abandoning who you were, you are integrating those experiences into a broader perspective. This integration allows you to move forward without erasing your past. Eventually, the fear others feel no longer feels personal. You see it as part of the human response to change. This understanding dissolves resentment and replaces it with calm acceptance. In that calm, you realize that being unrecognizable is not about distancing yourself from others. It is about becoming fully present in your own life, even if that presence challenges familiar perceptions. And from that place, you continue walking forward, knowing that those who are ready will meet you there, and those who are not will remain where they feel safest, each following their own path through the same changing world. As you made peace with the fear your transformation stirred in others, another realization slowly surfaced, quieter but just as profound. Even when people stopped resisting your growth, they did not necessarily update their understanding of you. They continued to speak to a version of you that no longer existed, referencing memories as if they were current facts. At first it felt strange, almost disorienting, as though you were being mistaken for someone else while standing in your own life. Then you began to see something deeper. People were not trying to misrepresent you. They were holding on to the version of you that made sense within their story. There is a subtle pain in recognizing that no matter how much you change, many people will remember you in simplified ways. Human memory does not capture complexity well. It reduces people to roles, moments, or impressions that were easiest to understand at the time. Someone might always see you as the shy one, the reliable one, the difficult one, the one who left, the one who stayed too long. These labels are not malicious. They are shortcuts the mind uses to navigate relationships. At first, you may feel an urge to correct these outdated perceptions. You want to explain who you are now, to update the narrative so it matches your current reality. This desire comes from a natural wish to be seen accurately. Being misunderstood can feel like invisibility, as if your growth has gone unnoticed. But trying to rewrite others' memories often leads to frustration, because memory is not a neutral record. It is shaped by emotion, perspective,
and time. Buddhist teachings remind us that perception is filtered through each person's conditioning. The way someone remembers you says as much about their experience as it does about your behavior. Their simplified version of you reflects what they needed you to be in their story. Accepting this does not mean agreeing with their interpretation. It means recognizing that you cannot control how you exist in someone else's mind. There is also freedom in letting go of the need to be remembered correctly. When you stop trying to manage your image in other people's memories, you reclaim energy that was tied to defending your identity. You no longer feel compelled to justify your decisions or clarify your intentions. Your focus shifts from being understood to being authentic. You may still feel moments of sadness when you realize that someone who once knew you deeply now relates to you through an outdated lens. It can feel like a quiet loss, not of the person themselves, but of the shared understanding you once had. This grief is natural. It reflects the human desire for connection that evolves with you. Over time, you begin to see that being remembered inaccurately does not diminish your present reality. The version of you that exists now is shaped by awareness, not by recollection. Your life is not confined to the stories others tell about you. It unfolds through your choices in the present. There is also humility in accepting that you remember others in simplified ways too. You may still see someone as they were during a particular period, even though they have changed since then. Recognizing this mutual limitation softens judgment and increases compassion. Everyone is navigating incomplete impressions of each other. You might notice that those who are willing to update their perception do so naturally without needing persuasion. They ask questions, observe and adjust their understanding through interaction. These relationships feel lighter because they allow space for evolution. Others remain attached to the past because it feels stable. Both responses are part of the human experience. Releasing the need to be remembered correctly also reduces the fear of misinterpretation. You no longer feel responsible for how your actions will be perceived in the long term. This freedom encourages honesty because you are not performing for future narratives. You act according to your values, rather than according to how you might be remembered. There is a deeper spiritual aspect to this acceptance. Buddhism teaches that the self is not a fixed entity, so the idea of a correct memory becomes less meaningful. Each moment you are slightly different from the last. Expecting others to capture that fluidity in memory is unrealistic. Recognizing this helps you detach from the illusion of a permanent identity. You may also discover that simplified memories serve a purpose. They allow relationships to continue without constant renegotiation of identity. While they can feel limiting, they also provide continuity. Understanding this dual role reduces resentment. As you continue to grow, you become less concerned with legacy in the conventional sense. Instead of wanting to be remembered accurately, you focus on living meaningfully. You trust that whatever impression remains will reflect something genuine, even if it is incomplete. There may be moments when someone's outdated perception collides with your current reality in a way that feels jarring. Instead of reacting defensively, you learn to respond with patience. You recognize that their memory is a snapshot from another time, not a judgment on your present self. Letting go of the need to correct every misunderstanding also protects your peace. Constantly clarifying your identity can become exhausting. Choosing silence in certain situations is not surrender. It is an acknowledgement that understanding cannot be forced. You begin to appreciate the quiet dignity of being known by your actions rather than by explanations. Those who engage with you in the present will form new impressions organically. Those who do not will hold on to their memories, and that is acceptable. There is also a sense of liberation in knowing that you are free to evolve without needing to update everyone. You are not obligated to keep your personal growth synchronized with others' perceptions. Your journey belongs to you, not to the collective memory of those around you. Eventually, the discomfort fades, replaced by a calm acceptance that your identity exists beyond recollection. You carry your truth within you, independent of how it is remembered. This independence creates a deeper stability because it is not tied to external validation. You may even find gratitude for the versions of you that live in others' memories. They represent chapters of your life that shaped you, even if they no longer define you. Honoring those chapters without being confined by them reflects maturity. As you move forward, you become more present in each interaction, aware that memories are being formed but not attached to how they will be interpreted later. This presence allows you to engage fully without anxiety about permanence. In time, you realize that the desire to be remembered correctly was another form of clinging to identity. Releasing it aligns you with the fluid nature of existence. You stop trying to control the narrative and start living the experience. And in that release, there is a quiet peace that comes from knowing that who you are now does not depend on how you are remembered, only on how deeply you are awake to the life unfolding in front of you. As you loosened your grip on how you are remembered, another layer of freedom quietly revealed itself. You began to notice how much of your energy had once been spent trying to correct misunderstandings, clarifying intentions, defending decisions, explaining who you really were. Without that effort, there was suddenly more silence in your life. Not the empty kind, but the peaceful kind that does not demand constant response. In that silence, you discovered that not every false perception needs to be dismantled for you to live truthfully. It can feel deeply uncomfortable to know that someone holds an inaccurate view of you and to do nothing about it. The instinct to correct is strong because misunderstanding feels like injustice. It creates a tension between who you are and who they think you are. The mind wants to restore alignment, to close the gap, to make reality visible. But spiritual maturity begins when you realize that alignment with your own truth matters more than alignment with every external perception. There is a quiet strength in allowing misunderstanding to exist without resistance. It does not mean you agree with it. It means you no longer feel threatened by it. You recognize that people interpret reality through their own experiences, fears, and expectations. Their perception of you is shaped by their inner world, not just by your actions. Trying to control that perception becomes an endless task because you cannot rewrite another person's conditioning. Buddhist teachings emphasize the concept of right effort, using energy wisely rather than compulsively. Correcting every false perception is exhausting because it assumes responsibility for something that cannot be fully managed. When you release that responsibility, your energy returns to the present moment. You focus on living authentically instead of defending authenticity. You may still feel the urge to explain yourself, especially when silence feels like surrender. But silence can also be a form of confidence. It signals that you trust your truth enough to let it stand without reinforcement. This confidence is not arrogance. It is the calm understanding that reality does not depend on agreement to exist. Letting misunderstanding remain can also reveal which relationships are built on genuine connection. People who care deeply will seek clarity rather than cling to assumptions. They will ask questions, listen, and adjust their understanding. Those who are comfortable with misunderstanding may not be invested in knowing you fully. Recognizing this distinction helps you decide where to direct your attention. There is also compassion in this acceptance. When you stop trying to correct everyone, you acknowledge that each person is navigating their own challenges. Their misinterpretation may come from pain, insecurity, or limited perspective. Understanding this reduces the impulse to take it personally. Choosing peace over correction does not mean abandoning boundaries. If a misunderstanding leads to harmful behavior, addressing it may be necessary, but when it is merely an inaccurate opinion, silence can be a healthier response. You conserve energy for what truly matters, rather than engaging in debates that change nothing. You might notice that your inner state becomes more stable when you stop reacting to misperceptions. Emotional fluctuations decrease because your sense of self is no longer tied to others' approval or understanding. This stability creates a foundation for deeper peace. There is also a subtle liberation in not needing to perform clarity. You do not have to craft perfect explanations or anticipate counter-arguments. You are free to exist without rehearsing conversations in your mind. This mental quiet allows creativity, insight, and calm to emerge. Over time, you may even see misunderstanding as neutral rather than negative. It becomes part of the diversity of human perception, not a problem to solve. This shift reflects a broader acceptance of imperfection in relationships and communication. Buddhism teaches that suffering often comes from attachment to being right. Letting misunderstanding exist releases that attachment. You no longer need to prove your perspective to feel secure. Your peace comes from alignment with your values rather than validation from others. You may also discover that some misunderstandings dissolve on their own. As time passes and your actions remain consistent, perceptions adjust naturally. This organic change is more sustainable than forced correction because it arises from observation rather than argument. There can still be moments when misunderstanding stings, especially if it comes from someone you care about. In those moments, you learn to comfort yourself instead of seeking immediate resolution. Self-compassion becomes the bridge between hurt and acceptance. Allowing misunderstanding also protects you from the cycle of overexposure. Constantly explaining your inner world can make you feel drained and vulnerable. Keeping certain experiences private preserves your emotional energy and maintains a sense of personal space. You begin to see that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the absence of inner struggle. When you stop fighting perceptions, your mind relaxes. The need to monitor how you are seen fades, replaced by attention to how you are living. This maturity also deepens your empathy for others. You recognize how often people are misunderstood themselves, how much pain arises from the desire to be seen accurately. Instead of adding to that tension, you contribute calm by accepting imperfection in understanding. As you continue, you may notice that conversations become lighter because you are not trying to steer them toward clarity. You engage naturally, responding to what is present rather than correcting what is past. This ease improves communication more than defensive explanations ever could. Eventually, the idea of being misunderstood loses its power. It becomes just another aspect of human interaction, like differences in taste or opinion. You do not need everyone to see you the same way to feel complete. In that acceptance, you experience a deeper form of freedom, the freedom to live without constant self-justification. Your actions become expressions of your values rather than reactions to perception. And from that place, peace feels less like something you have to maintain and more like something that naturally arises when you stop fighting battles that were never yours to win. As you learn to let misunderstanding exist without disturbing your peace, you began to notice another quiet shift happening inside you. It was not about how others saw you anymore. It was about how you saw your own future. Goals that once felt urgent no longer carried the same emotional charge. Plans that once defined your direction now felt distant, like ideas belonging to someone you used to be. At first, this change was unsettling. You wondered if you had lost motivation, if something inside you had gone quiet in a way that meant you were drifting without purpose. But slowly, a different understanding began to form. The silence was not emptiness. It was space being cleared for something new. There is a unique kind of confusion that arises when old dreams stop speaking to you. These dreams were once anchors. They gave you direction, identity, and a reason to endure difficulties. Letting them fade can feel like losing a map while still being in motion. You may question whether you are abandoning your potential or betraying the person who once believed so strongly in those goals. Much of this discomfort comes from the belief that ambition must remain constant to be valid. Society often treats changing direction as weakness or inconsistency. You are encouraged to persist, to stay committed, to prove your dedication by refusing to let go. But personal evolution does not follow a straight line. As awareness deepens, desires transform because they were connected to earlier versions of you. Buddhist teachings emphasize impermanence not only in external circumstances, but in internal motivations. What once inspired you may lose relevance as your understanding of life expands. This shift is not failure, it is alignment with a deeper perspective. Holding on to outdated ambitions can create suffering because it forces you to pursue something that no longer reflects your truth. You may also feel guilt when releasing old dreams, especially if others invested hope in them. Family members, friends, or mentors might have celebrated your previous goals. Changing direction can feel like disappointing them or wasting their belief in you. Recognizing that their expectations were based on a past version of you helps reduce this guilt. Your responsibility is not to fulfill a narrative that no longer fits your reality. There is also fear of uncertainty. Old dreams provided structure, even if they no longer felt authentic. Without them, the future becomes less defined. This openness can feel threatening because it removes the illusion of control. Learning to tolerate this uncertainty is part of growth. It allows new possibilities to emerge without being forced into predetermined shapes. Sometimes the shift happens gradually. You notice less excitement when thinking about goals that once energized you. Activities connected to those ambitions feel more like obligations than expressions of passion. You might continue out of habit, hoping the enthusiasm will return, but the disconnection persists. Accepting this disconnection is the first step toward redefining your path. You may also discover that your values have changed. What once seemed important might now feel superficial or incomplete. Achievements that used to symbolize success may no longer satisfy your deeper needs. This reevaluation can lead to a more meaningful understanding of fulfillment, one that is not measured by external recognition. Letting ambitions evolve also requires letting go of comparison. Watching others pursue similar goals can trigger doubt, making you question whether you are giving up too soon. But their path is shaped by their experiences, not yours. Respecting your own timing prevents unnecessary self-criticism. There can be moments of nostalgia for the clarity you once had. Certainty feels comforting, even if it was based on limited awareness. Accepting that clarity can change allows you to appreciate past ambitions without clinging to them. They were stepping stones, not destinations. Buddhism teaches that attachment to outcomes creates suffering. When you release attachment to specific dreams, you open yourself to the possibility that fulfillment may come from unexpected directions. This openness does not mean passivity. It means engaging with life without rigid expectations. You may find that new interests emerge quietly, without the intensity of your previous ambitions. These interests feel lighter, less driven by pressure, and more by curiosity. Allowing them to grow at their own pace prevents them from becoming another rigid identity. There is also wisdom in recognizing that some dreams were motivated by a desire for validation rather than genuine passion. As you become less dependent on approval, those motivations lose power. What remains is a clearer sense of what truly resonates with you. This transition can feel lonely because others may not understand why you are changing course. They might encourage you to stay focused or remind you of how close you were to achieving your original goals. Their concern comes from familiarity, not from awareness of your inner transformation. Trusting your inner signals becomes essential. You learn to listen to subtle feelings of alignment or resistance rather than relying solely on logic. This intuitive guidance reflects a deeper connection to yourself.
You may also experience a sense of relief as you release ambitions that were driven by obligation. Without the pressure to perform, your energy returns. You rediscover joy in simple activities that were overshadowed by constant striving. Over time, you realize that ambition itself can evolve from a desire to achieve into a desire to understand, contribute, or simply experience life more fully. This shift creates a more sustainable form of motivation because it is rooted in curiosity rather than competition. There is a quiet courage in allowing your direction to change without labeling it as confusion. Confusion implies a lack of clarity, but what you are experiencing is expansion. Your perspective has grown beyond the limits of your previous goals. You may also find that letting go of old dreams makes room for rest. Continuous striving can exhaust the mind and body. Pausing to reassess your path restores balance and prevents burnout. Eventually, new dreams may begin to form, not as urgent demands but as gentle invitations. They feel aligned with your current understanding rather than with external expectations. Pursuing them feels natural rather than forced. This process teaches you that identity is not defined by a single ambition. You are not limited to one purpose or direction. Your life can hold multiple chapters, each with its own focus. As you continue forward, the fear of drifting fades. You realize that you are not lost. You are transitioning. The absence of old dreams is not emptiness. It is the beginning of a new conversation between who you are and what life is asking from you now. And in that conversation, you find a different kind of clarity, one that does not rely on certainty but on trust in the unfolding path beneath your feet. As your old dreams loosened their hold and new possibilities began to form quietly in the background, another realization surfaced, one that felt more personal than any change in ambition. You began to see that it was not only your goals that were evolving. The way you had learned to exist in the world was changing too. Habits of speech, ways of reacting, the careful mask you wore in certain situations, all of it started to feel heavy, as if it belonged to a time when you needed protection more than authenticity. What once felt necessary now felt restrictive, and the shift was not dramatic. It was quiet, almost tender, like saying goodbye to a version of yourself that had done its job. There is a deep emotional complexity in recognizing that parts of your identity were built for survival rather than expression. Personas form when the environment feels unsafe, unpredictable, or demanding. You learn to become agreeable to avoid conflict, strong to avoid vulnerability, distant to avoid disappointment, or invisible to avoid scrutiny. These adaptations are not weaknesses. They are intelligent responses to circumstances that required caution. At the time they formed, these personas were acts of self-preservation. They allowed you to navigate situations that might have overwhelmed you otherwise. You may have been praised for them, encouraged to maintain them, or even relied on by others because they made you predictable. Over time, the persona can feel inseparable from who you are, even though it was originally a response rather than an essence. When awareness deepens, you begin to notice the difference between the self that reacts automatically and the self that observes quietly. The persona operates on habit. It anticipates danger even when none exists. It speaks before reflection, agrees before consideration, withdraws before connection. As your inner clarity grows, these responses start to feel unnecessary. The protection they offered becomes less relevant in a life that no longer requires constant defense. This transition can feel unsettling because letting go of a protective identity means facing the world without the armor that once kept you safe. Vulnerability replaces predictability. You may worry that without the persona, you will be exposed to the same pain that created it. But the circumstances have changed. You have changed. The skills you developed for survival can now be replaced with awareness, boundaries, and self-trust. Buddhist teachings speak about the illusion of a fixed self, emphasizing that identity is a collection of conditions rather than a permanent structure. The persona is one of those conditions. It arose from a specific context and dissolves when that context no longer dominates your life. Seeing this impermanence allows you to release the persona without feeling that you are losing yourself. There is also grief in this process. Even though the persona limited you, it also accompanied you through difficult times. It witnessed your struggles, protected your vulnerabilities, and allowed you to function when you felt fragile. Honoring it means acknowledging its role without clinging to it. Gratitude replaces resentment. You may find yourself reflecting on the moments when that identity served you well. Times when being strong prevented collapse, when being quiet prevented escalation, when being accommodating preserved peace. These memories help you understand that the persona was not false. It was context-specific truth. Letting it go does not erase those experiences. It integrates them into a broader understanding of who you are becoming. Instead of being defined by a single survival strategy, you develop flexibility. You can be open without being naive, assertive without being defensive, calm without being detached. This transformation often occurs gradually. You might notice yourself responding differently in situations that once triggered automatic reactions. A comment that would have made you retreat now meets calm curiosity. A conflict that would have provoked defensiveness now invites thoughtful dialogue. These shifts reflect the fading of the old persona and the emergence of a more authentic presence. Others may react to this change with confusion. They were accustomed to interacting with the protective version of you. Without it, the dynamic feels unfamiliar. Some may try to pull you back into your previous role because it is comfortable for them. Recognizing this pattern helps you remain grounded in your new awareness. You may also experience moments of vulnerability that feel raw, as if you are relearning how to exist without a shield. This vulnerability is not weakness. It is openness to life as it is, without constant anticipation of harm. Over time, this openness becomes a source of strength because it allows genuine connection. There is a quiet courage in choosing authenticity over safety. Safety can create stagnation if it prevents growth. Authenticity involves risk, but it also brings vitality. You feel more present, more engaged, less divided between who you are and who you pretend to be. Buddhism teaches that suffering arises from clinging to what is no longer necessary. Holding on to a protective identity beyond its usefulness creates tension because it conflicts with your current reality. Releasing it aligns you with the natural flow of change. You may discover new aspects of yourself that were hidden behind the persona. Interests, emotions, and perspectives that were suppressed begin to surface. This rediscovery can feel like meeting yourself again, but without the constraints that once defined you. As you continue, self-trust grows. You realize that you do not need a fixed identity to navigate the world. Awareness itself becomes your guide. You respond to situations based on presence rather than habit, allowing for more nuanced and compassionate interactions. There is also freedom in no longer carrying the weight of maintaining a role. Performance requires constant monitoring of behavior to ensure consistency. Without it, your energy becomes available for creativity, reflection, and genuine connection. You may still encounter situations where the old persona tries to reappear, especially under stress. Recognizing it without judgment allows it to pass without regaining control. This awareness reinforces the understanding that identity is fluid, not fixed. Eventually, the protective identity fades into memory, appreciated but no longer active. It becomes part of your history rather than your present. You carry the wisdom it gave you without being confined by its limitations. In that quiet transition, you realize that the persona did not die in vain. It completed its purpose and stepped aside to make room for a self that no longer needs constant protection. And as you move forward,
you do so with a deeper compassion for who you were and a gentle curiosity for who you are still becoming, knowing that safety now comes from awareness, not from hiding behind a role. As the protective persona quietly stepped aside and you began living with more openness than defense, another unexpected silence entered your life. It was not the silence of isolation, but the absence of something you once relied on without realizing it. Applause, the familiar encouragement, the approval that confirmed you were doing well, the reassuring reactions from people who had always witnessed your efforts. Without it, your progress felt strangely invisible, as if you were moving forward in a space where no one was keeping score. At first, this absence created doubt. You wondered if you were still on the right path, or if you had drifted so far that no one could follow. But slowly, a different realization began to take shape. Maybe the journey was never meant to be validated by the same voices forever. There is a deep discomfort in learning to walk without the applause of familiar people. For much of your life, encouragement served as fuel. It told you that your efforts mattered, that your direction made sense, that you were not alone. When that feedback disappears, motivation can feel fragile. You may question whether your growth is real or whether it only existed in response to recognition. This discomfort reveals how much validation shapes identity. Praise creates a sense of belonging, a feeling that your choices align with expectations. Without it, you face a more personal question. Would you still pursue this path if no one noticed? This question is not meant to discourage you. It is meant to reveal whether your motivation comes from within or from approval. Buddhist teachings often describe the danger of attachment to praise and blame. Both create dependency on external conditions. When you rely on approval, your sense of worth fluctuates with others' reactions. Learning to walk without applause breaks that dependency, allowing you to act from conviction rather than from expectation. At first, this independence can feel lonely. Familiar people may not understand your new direction, or they may simply be occupied with their own lives. The absence of recognition does not necessarily mean they no longer care. It means your path has become more personal, less visible to those who are not walking it with you. You might notice moments when you feel tempted to share your progress just to receive reassurance. Posting achievements, hinting at struggles, seeking acknowledgement indirectly. These impulses are natural. They reflect the human need for connection. Recognizing them without judgment helps you understand the role validation once played. Self-trust begins when you learn to acknowledge your own effort without waiting for confirmation. This does not mean isolating yourself from others. It means developing an internal sense of direction that remains steady even when feedback is absent. You become your own witness. There is also courage in continuing when recognition is uncertain. Many meaningful changes happen quietly, without public milestones or visible results. The discipline required to persist without applause builds resilience. It teaches you to value the process rather than the response it generates. You may also discover that walking alone sharpens your awareness. Without the distraction of approval, you pay closer attention to your intentions. You ask yourself whether your actions align with your values rather than with expectations. This alignment creates a deeper sense of integrity. Over time, the absence of validation becomes less threatening. You realize that applause can be inconsistent, influenced by factors unrelated to your effort. Depending on it creates instability. Internal trust provides a steadier foundation because it is not subject to changing opinions. There can still be moments of doubt, especially when progress feels slow or invisible. In those moments, remembering why you started becomes essential. Your reasons anchor you when external encouragement is unavailable. You may also begin to appreciate the quiet freedom that comes from not performing for approval. Without the pressure to impress, you explore ideas and actions more honestly. Creativity expands because it is not constrained by fear of judgment. Buddhism teaches that true confidence arises from understanding rather than from comparison. When you stop measuring yourself against others' expectations, your confidence becomes calmer, less reactive. You do not need to prove your worth because you are no longer defining it through recognition. There is also compassion in recognizing that familiar people may not be able to applaud what they do not fully understand. Their silence is not always indifference. Sometimes it reflects distance from experiences they cannot relate to. Accepting this prevents resentment. As self-trust grows, you may find that you become less concerned with being seen. Visibility loses its urgency. You focus on living authentically rather than on documenting your journey. This shift creates a sense of privacy that feels protective rather than isolating. Eventually, you realize that the absence of applause is not a void, but a space where your inner voice can be heard more clearly. Without competing opinions, you listen to your intuition, noticing subtle signals that guide your decisions. You may also attract new forms of connection that are based on shared values rather than on shared history. These connections feel different because they support your current direction rather than your past identity. There is a quiet pride in knowing that you can continue without external encouragement, not a pride that seeks recognition, but one that comes from resilience. You understand that your path is valid even when it is invisible to others. Over time, the need for applause transforms into appreciation for quiet support. A simple acknowledgement, a genuine conversation, or even silent understanding becomes more meaningful than loud praise. You learn to recognize quality over quantity in validation. You might still feel nostalgia for the days when encouragement was constant. That nostalgia is not a sign that you were happier then. It reflects the comfort of familiarity. Growth often involves trading comfort for authenticity. As you keep moving forward, you notice that your steps feel more grounded. You are not rushing to reach milestones that others will celebrate. You are walking at a pace that reflects your own rhythm. This alignment reduces anxiety and increases presence. In time, you see that learning to walk without applause was not about losing support. It was about discovering a deeper source of motivation that does not depend on being witnessed. And from that place, you continue your journey with a quiet confidence, knowing that even in silence, your steps still carry meaning because they are guided by trust rather than by the need to be seen. As you learn to move forward without applause, trusting your own steps instead of waiting for familiar approval, another emotion quietly surfaced, one that felt heavier than doubt. It was not about whether you could continue, it was about whether you should. The distance between who you were becoming and where you came from started to feel visible in ways that were difficult to ignore. Success no longer felt purely uplifting. Growth carried a strange weight, as if every step forward was also a step away from something sacred. You realize that evolving can sometimes feel like betrayal, even when no one accuses you of it. There is a complex guilt that arises when you surpass the environment that shaped you. This environment may have been a family, a community, a culture, or a set of expectations that defined what was possible. It gave you language, habits, beliefs, and a sense of belonging. When you grow beyond its limits, you may feel as though you are abandoning the people and places that formed you. This guilt is rooted in loyalty. You were taught, directly or indirectly, that staying connected meant staying similar. Change can feel like rejection, even when it is simply expansion. You might worry that your progress implies judgment, that your new perspective exposes the limitations of the past. Even if you never express these thoughts, the fear of being perceived that way can weigh on you. Buddhist teachings emphasize compassion for all beings, including the earlier versions of ourselves and the environments that shaped us. Growth does not require contempt for the past. It requires understanding that conditions change. You can honor your origins without remaining confined by them. You may notice this guilt appearing in subtle ways. Downplaying achievements, avoiding conversations about your life, or returning to old patterns when visiting familiar places. These behaviors attempt to maintain continuity, to reassure yourself and others that you have not changed too much. But suppressing your evolution creates inner tension because it divides you between authenticity and obligation. There is also fear of losing connection. Shared experiences create bonds, and when your experiences diverge, communication can feel strained. You may worry that your growth will create distance that cannot be bridged. This fear can tempt you to slow down or hide your progress to preserve closeness. At the same time, you might feel sadness when you realize that the environment you came from cannot fully accompany you into your new life. Certain conversations no longer resonate. Certain struggles no longer define you. This sadness is not a rejection of your roots. It is mourning the simplicity of belonging without explanation. Understanding that growth is not a competition helps reduce guilt. Surpassing your environment does not diminish its value. It reflects the opportunities and insights that emerged from it. Your progress can be seen as an extension of what you were given rather than as a departure from it. You may also recognize that your growth can inspire others, even if they never say it openly. Seeing someone evolve can expand what feels possible. It can challenge limiting beliefs without confrontation. Your journey becomes a quiet example rather than a declaration. There is humility in acknowledging that you did not create yourself entirely. Many influences contributed to who you are: support, sacrifice, lessons learned through both care and hardship. Honoring these influences allows you to move forward without erasing the past. Buddhism teaches that attachment to identity creates suffering. Clinging to the identity of where you came from can prevent you from embracing who you are becoming. Letting go of that attachment does not mean forgetting your origins. It means allowing identity to evolve naturally. You may also need to redefine loyalty. Loyalty does not require stagnation. True loyalty can include living fully, using the opportunities you have to create a meaningful life. By doing so, you honor the effort that made your growth possible. There can be moments when others express discomfort with your change, even subtly. Comments about how you are different, how you have changed, how things used to be. These remarks may come from nostalgia or insecurity rather than from accusation. Responding with kindness instead of defensiveness preserves connection without sacrificing authenticity. You might also discover that the environment you surpassed continues to exist within you in unexpected ways. Values, memories, and habits remain part of your foundation. Growth does not erase these elements, it integrates them into a broader perspective. There is strength in accepting that you can belong to more than one world. You do not have to choose between your past and your present. You can carry both, allowing each to inform your understanding without limiting your direction. Self-forgiveness plays an important role in releasing guilt. You did not choose where you started, but you can choose where you go. Accepting this responsibility without self-blame allows you to move forward with clarity. Over time, the guilt softens into gratitude. You see your origins not as chains, but as roots. Roots provide stability while allowing growth upward. They do not prevent expansion, they support it. You may also find ways to give back without returning to old limitations. Sharing knowledge, offering support, or simply maintaining connection can bridge the distance created by growth. Contribution replaces guilt as the way you honor where you came from. There is peace in recognizing that loyalty to your origins and loyalty to your evolution do not have to conflict. Both can coexist when you approach them with awareness rather than with fear. Eventually, surpassing your environment feels less like leaving and more like continuing the journey that began there. Your path extends beyond its boundaries, but it remains connected to its influence. In that understanding, you realize that growth is not disloyalty. It is the natural unfolding of potential that was always present. waiting for the conditions that would allow it to emerge. And as you continue forward, you carry your origins with quiet respect, not as a weight that holds you back, but as a foundation that helped you stand tall enough to see farther than you ever could before. As the guilt of surpassing your origins softened into gratitude, you began to notice something even more intimate than distance from the past. It was not just the environment that had shaped you. It was the invisible patterns you carried within you, habits of thought and emotion that formed long before you had the awareness to question them. These patterns once felt like personality, like destiny, like something permanent. But now, in quiet moments of reflection, you could see them loosening their grip. Reactions that once felt automatic now paused before completing themselves. Feelings that used to overwhelm now appeared, moved through you, and faded. You realized you were witnessing something rare, the slow dissolving of conditioning that had guided your life without your permission. There is a profound strangeness in watching childhood patterns fall away while you are still alive to remember them. These patterns were formed during a time when survival depended on adaptation. You learned how to gain approval, how to avoid punishment, how to anticipate moods, how to silence your own needs to maintain harmony. They were not conscious choices. They were strategies developed in a world where you had little control. Because they formed early, these patterns often operate beneath awareness. They shape your responses to authority, intimacy, conflict, and failure. You may find yourself reacting with fear when none is warranted, seeking reassurance when you are already capable, apologizing even when you have done nothing wrong. For years, these reactions feel natural, as if they are part of your identity. Awareness changes this relationship. When you begin to observe your thoughts and emotions without immediately acting on them, you create space between stimulus and response. In that space, you see the pattern before it takes over. The anger that once exploded now reveals itself as fear. The withdrawal that once felt protective now appears as avoidance. This clarity does not come all at once. It unfolds gradually through repeated moments of noticing. Buddhist teachings emphasize mindfulness as a way to see reality clearly. When applied to conditioning, mindfulness becomes a mirror that reflects the origins of your behavior. You start to recognize which reactions belong to the present and which are echoes of the past. This distinction weakens the automatic power of old patterns. There can be grief in this process. Recognizing how much of your life was shaped by fear or insecurity can feel overwhelming. You may mourn the years spent reacting instead of choosing, but this grief is also healing because it acknowledges the child who had to adapt in order to survive. You might also feel compassion for that earlier version of yourself. Instead of judging your patterns as flaws, you see them as intelligent responses to circumstances beyond your control. This compassion softens resistance and allows change to happen without self-criticism. As conditioning dissolves, you may notice new possibilities emerging. Situations that once triggered anxiety now invite curiosity. You respond to criticism with reflection instead of defensiveness. You allow yourself to express needs that were once hidden. These changes feel small but carry deep significance because they represent freedom from unconscious repetition. There is also a sense of disorientation when familiar reactions disappear. Without them, you may feel uncertain about how to behave. The patterns provided a script, even if it was limiting. Without a script, you must rely on awareness to guide your choices. This uncertainty is not weakness. It is the space where authenticity develops. You may encounter moments when old conditioning resurfaces unexpectedly, especially under stress. This does not mean you have failed. It means the pattern is deeply ingrained. Each time you notice it without judgment, its influence weakens. Awareness itself becomes the mechanism of change. Buddhism teaches that suffering arises from attachment to illusion. Conditioning creates the illusion that your reactions are inevitable. Seeing through this illusion reveals the possibility of responding differently. You are no longer bound by the past in the same way. There can also be a quiet joy in realizing that you are not fixed. Identity becomes fluid rather than predetermined. You experience yourself as a process rather than as a set of traits. This perspective reduces fear of change because you understand that transformation is natural. Relationships may shift as your patterns dissolve. People who were accustomed to your old responses may feel confused by your new ones. You might set boundaries where you once complied, speak honestly where you once stayed silent, remain calm where you once reacted intensely. These changes redefine the dynamics of interaction. You may also develop greater empathy for others who are still guided by conditioning. Recognizing your own patterns helps you see theirs without judgment. You understand that everyone is navigating invisible influences from their past. There is a growing sense of responsibility that accompanies awareness. Once you see your patterns clearly, continuing to act unconsciously feels less acceptable. You become more intentional about how you speak, how you respond, how you treat yourself and others. Over time, you realize that dissolving conditioning does not erase your past. It integrates it. You carry the lessons without being controlled by them. Your childhood becomes a chapter rather than a blueprint. You might find yourself revisiting memories with new understanding. Situations that once felt confusing now make sense in the context of survival. This reinterpretation can bring closure and forgiveness both for yourself and for others. As awareness deepens, you experience moments of stillness where reactions simply do not arise. In these moments, you feel a quiet freedom, as if you are meeting life directly rather than through the filter of history. This freedom is not dramatic. It is subtle and steady. There is also humility in recognizing that conditioning may never disappear completely. New patterns can form if awareness fades. Maintaining mindfulness becomes a lifelong practice, not a final achievement. Eventually, witnessing patterns fall away feels less like losing parts of yourself and more like uncovering what was always there beneath the conditioning, a calm presence that does not depend on defense or approval. In that presence, you understand that you are not the child who had to adapt, not the patterns that formed in response to fear, not the reactions that once defined you. You are the awareness that sees them, learns from them, and gently releases them. And from that awareness, you step into each moment with a quiet confidence that comes from knowing you are no longer repeating the past automatically, but living consciously in a present that is finally your own. As the old patterns loosened and the past stopped dictating your reactions, a quiet space opened where certainty used to live. You were no longer controlled by who you had been, but you were not yet settled into who you were becoming. The familiar reference points disappeared. Decisions that once felt obvious now required deeper listening. You could not rely on the old scripts, yet the new ones had not formed. This in-between state felt strange, like standing on a shoreline where the land behind you is fading into mist while the horizon ahead is still unclear. It was not regression, it was transition. There is a unique disorientation that comes when identity begins to dissolve before a new one takes shape. For most of life, you move with a sense of continuity. Even when circumstances change, you still feel like the same person navigating them. But during deep transformation, continuity weakens. You may feel unfamiliar to yourself, as if your thoughts, preferences, and reactions belong to someone you are still getting to know. This uncertainty can be unsettling because identity provides stability. Knowing who you are gives you a sense of direction, a way to interpret experiences, a framework for choices. Without it, life can feel unstructured. You might question your decisions more than usual, wondering whether they reflect growth or confusion. Buddhist teachings describe this phase as part of awakening. When attachment to a fixed self loosens, the illusion of solidity dissolves. What remains is awareness without a clear narrative. This state is not emptiness in a negative sense. It is openness, a field of possibilities not yet defined. At first, openness can feel like loss. You may miss the confidence that came from certainty, even if that certainty was limiting. Familiar roles, beliefs, and goals provided orientation. Without them, you must navigate by intuition rather than by habit. You might notice changes in how you relate to time. The future feels less predictable because you are no longer following a predetermined path. Plans that once seemed essential now feel optional. This flexibility can be liberating, but it can also create anxiety because it removes the illusion of control. Relationships may also feel different. Others might still interact with you based on who you used to be, while you respond from a place that feels new and untested. Conversations can feel slightly misaligned, as if you are speaking from a language they have not yet learned. There can be moments when you question whether you are losing yourself rather than evolving. This fear arises because transformation involves letting go of familiar markers of identity. Recognizing that uncertainty is a sign of change rather than of failure helps you remain steady. Sacred uncertainty invites patience. Growth does not always follow a visible timeline. Some changes occur beneath the surface, reshaping your values and perceptions before they become visible in behavior. Trusting this invisible process requires surrendering the need for immediate clarity. You may also discover that not knowing creates space for authenticity. Without a fixed image to maintain, you are free to explore different ways of being. You experiment with new interests, new perspectives, new ways of relating to yourself and others. This exploration is not instability, it is discovery. Buddhism teaches that clinging to certainty creates suffering because it resists the natural fluidity of life. Embracing uncertainty aligns you with reality, which is always changing. Instead of trying to anchor yourself in permanence, you learn to move with the flow of experience. There is also a quiet humility in admitting that you do not have all the answers. This humility softens judgment toward yourself and others. You become more open to learning, more receptive to perspectives that once seemed irrelevant. During this phase, solitude can feel both comforting and challenging. Being alone allows you to hear your inner voice without interference, but it also confronts you with the absence of external guidance. Learning to sit with that silence strengthens self-trust. You may notice that your priorities shift in unexpected ways. Goals that once defined success lose their urgency, while values that once felt abstract become central. This shift reflects a deeper alignment with your evolving sense of meaning. There can also be a subtle excitement beneath the discomfort. Uncertainty holds potential. It means you are not confined to a predetermined outcome. Your life is unfolding in ways that cannot be fully predicted, which makes each step an act of creation. You might find yourself drawn to practices that ground you in the present, such as meditation, journaling, or simply spending time in nature. These practices provide stability not by defining who you are, but by connecting you to awareness itself. Over time, you realize that identity is less about fixed traits and more about how you engage with life. The question shifts from "Who am I?" to "How am I living?" This shift reduces pressure because it focuses on action rather than on definition. You also begin to trust that clarity will emerge naturally. Just as old patterns dissolved gradually, a new sense of self will form through experience rather than through deliberate construction. You do not need to force it. There is peace in accepting that uncertainty is not an obstacle to be overcome, but a space to be inhabited. It is where transformation happens quietly, without the need for constant reassurance. Eventually, you notice that the disorientation softens into curiosity. Instead of fearing the unknown, you become interested in it. Each day reveals small clues about who you are becoming, not as a fixed destination, but as an evolving process. And in that curiosity, you discover a deeper freedom, the freedom to exist without needing to define yourself completely, to move forward guided by awareness rather than by labels, to trust that the person you are becoming will emerge naturally from the life you are living. From this place, uncertainty no longer feels like a void. It feels like a doorway, quietly open, waiting for you to step through without needing to know exactly what is on the other side. As uncertainty slowly transformed from fear into quiet curiosity, you began to move through life with a softer grip. You no longer chased constant stimulation, no longer felt the need to react to every noise, every opinion, every invitation to prove yourself. From the inside, this felt like peace, a calm awareness that did not need to announce itself. But from the outside, something else appeared to be happening. People started noticing your absence from dramas you once engaged in, your silence where you once explained, your distance from situations that used to consume your energy. What felt like clarity to you began to look like withdrawal to them. There is a misunderstood phase in deep inner growth where peace resembles disengagement. When you stop feeding chaos, chaos loses its hold on you. But those who are still accustomed to that dynamic may interpret your calm as indifference. They may assume you are pulling away, becoming cold, or losing interest in connection. In reality, you are simply no longer participating in patterns that once drained you. Enlightenment, in its early stages, often manifests as simplicity. You become less reactive, less eager to debate, less interested in proving your point. You listen more than you speak. You observe more than you intervene. This shift can be confusing for people who equate intensity with care. They may wonder why you are not as emotionally involved as before. Buddhist teachings describe this as detachment. But detachment does not mean apathy. It means relating to life without clinging. You still feel, still care, still engage, but you are no longer entangled in every passing emotion. Your peace comes from understanding impermanence, from seeing that most conflicts dissolve on their own when not fueled. This inner clarity reduces the need for constant interaction. Silence becomes comfortable instead of awkward. Solitude becomes nourishing instead of lonely. From the outside, however, these changes can look like avoidance. People may project their fears onto your quietness, interpreting it as rejection. You may also notice that conversations which once felt stimulating now feel exhausting. Small talk, gossip, repetitive complaints, they no longer hold the same appeal. This does not mean you judge those who engage in them. It simply means your attention has shifted toward what feels meaningful. There can be guilt in stepping back, especially if others rely on your emotional presence. You might worry that your calm is hurting them, that your boundaries are creating distance. Understanding that peace is not selfish helps you release this guilt. You are not withdrawing from people, you are withdrawing from suffering. Enlightenment also brings clarity about what is within your control. You stop trying to fix everyone, stop taking responsibility for emotions that are not yours, stop carrying burdens that belong to others. This clarity frees energy that was previously consumed by unnecessary effort. From the outside, this change can be unsettling because it disrupts familiar roles. If you were once the one who mediated conflicts, offered constant reassurance, or absorbed negativity, your absence leaves a gap. Others may interpret this as abandonment rather than as transformation. There is also a quieter way of caring that emerges through clarity. Instead of reacting impulsively, you respond thoughtfully. Instead of rescuing, you support. Instead of absorbing pain, you offer presence without losing yourself. This form of connection is deeper but less visible. You may find that you become more selective about where you invest your energy, not out of superiority, but out of awareness that attention is finite, Choosing peace over participation in unnecessary conflict is an act of self-respect, not of detachment from humanity. Buddhism teaches the middle path, engagement without attachment. You are neither fully withdrawn nor fully immersed. You move through life with balance, participating where it aligns with your values and stepping back where it does not. There can still be moments when you question whether you are becoming too distant. Self-reflection helps you distinguish between healthy boundaries and avoidance. True clarity does not isolate you, it connects you in more intentional ways. You may also notice that new relationships begin to form based on shared understanding rather than on shared chaos. These connections feel calmer, less dramatic, more supportive of growth. They reflect your new state rather than your old patterns. Over time, people who initially misunderstood your withdrawal may start to see its benefits. They may notice your steadiness, your ability to remain calm under pressure, your refusal to escalate conflict. Your peace becomes a quiet influence rather than a visible statement. There is humility in recognizing that enlightenment is not a final state, but an ongoing process. You continue learning, adjusting, deepening your understanding. Withdrawal is not the goal, clarity is. Withdrawal simply creates the space where clarity can develop. You may also discover that you re-engage with life in new ways. Activities that once felt overwhelming now feel manageable because you approach them without attachment. You participate without losing your center. The distance others perceive is often the absence of noise rather than the absence of care. Your presence becomes quieter but more grounded. You do not need to dominate conversations or reactions to feel connected. Eventually, you understand that enlightenment does not remove you from the world. It changes how you inhabit it. You are still here, still involved, but no longer entangled in every passing storm. And from that place of inner clarity, you continue forward with a calm that does not need to be explained, knowing that what looks like withdrawal from the outside is often the deepest form of presence from within, a steady awareness that remains even when everything else grows quiet. As your quiet presence replaced the need to react, and people slowly adjusted to the calm that once looked like distance, another subtle tension began to surface. It was not about misunderstanding anymore, it was about memory. You could feel it in the way certain people spoke to you, in the way their eyes searched for something familiar that no longer appeared on command. They were not rejecting who you had become, they were missing who you used to be. Their nostalgia carried warmth, affection, and also a quiet pressure, the unspoken wish that you might step back into a version of yourself that felt easier for them to recognize. There is a deep emotional complexity in allowing people to miss the old you without returning to that identity. Nostalgia can feel like love because it remembers the shared moments, the laughter, the closeness that once defined your connection. When someone expresses that they miss who you were, it can touch something tender inside you. You may wonder if your growth has created distance that cannot be repaired, or if your change has cost you something precious. At the same time, you understand that returning to an old version of yourself would mean abandoning the awareness you worked hard to gain. The person they remember existed under different conditions, with different fears, different needs, different ways of coping. That identity served a purpose, but it cannot be revived without losing the progress that followed. Buddhist teachings emphasize impermanence as a fundamental truth. Everything changes, including personalities, relationships, and roles. Holding on to what once was creates suffering because it resists the natural flow of life. Allowing nostalgia to exist without clinging to it honors the past while remaining present. You may notice that people's memories often simplify who you were. They remember the parts that fit their experience, the humor, the openness, the availability, the vulnerability, while overlooking the struggles that accompanied those traits. Their nostalgia is not for your pain, only for the comfort your presence gave them. This realization can soften resentment. Instead of feeling pressured, you see their longing as a form of appreciation. They are expressing that your past presence mattered to them, even if they do not fully understand why it changed.
There can still be moments when guilt arises. You may feel responsible for their sadness, tempted to recreate old behaviors just to ease their discomfort. Recognizing that each person must process change in their own way helps you resist this impulse. Your role is not to preserve others' comfort at the cost of your well-being.
Allowing nostalgia without regression requires emotional maturity. You acknowledge the past without performing it. You listen to memories without stepping back into the roles they describe. This balance protects your evolution while respecting shared history.
You might also discover that some connections deepen when both sides accept change. Conversations become more honest, less based on expectation, more rooted in who you are now rather than in who you were. These relationships evolve instead of dissolving. Others may drift away because their attachment is to the past rather than to the present. This loss can be painful, but it also creates space for new connections that align with your current self. There is compassion in understanding that change can feel like loss to those who witnessed your earlier life. They may feel as if they have lost access to a version of you that once made them feel understood or safe. Their grief does not mean you did something wrong. It reflects the natural difficulty of adapting to transformation.
You may also experience your own nostalgia. Certain memories carry comfort, reminding you of times when life felt simpler. Allowing yourself to feel that longing without trying to return to it helps you integrate your past rather than reject it.
Buddhism teaches that clinging to identity creates suffering for both yourself and others. Releasing the need to be who you were allows relationships to transform into something more authentic, even if that authenticity involves distance. There can be a quiet strength in standing firmly in who you are becoming while remaining gentle toward those who struggle to adjust. You do not need to argue, justify, or convince. Your consistency communicates more than explanations ever could.
Over time, nostalgia becomes less of a pressure and more of a shared memory. It no longer pulls you backward. It simply reminds you of the path you traveled to reach the present. You may find new ways to connect that honor, both the past and the present. Instead of recreating old dynamics, you create new ones that reflect your current awareness. These interactions feel different, but not necessarily weaker. There is also freedom in accepting that not everyone will understand your evolution. Some people prefer the comfort of familiarity, and your change disrupts that comfort. Allowing them to hold their memories without trying to control their perception preserves your peace. You begin to see that your responsibility is not to maintain continuity for others, but to live truthfully for yourself. This truthfulness becomes a quiet form of respect for your journey and for the authenticity of your relationships. Eventually, you realize that nostalgia and growth can coexist. The past remains part of your story, but it no longer defines your direction. You carry it as a memory, not as a destination. And in that understanding, you continue forward with a calm acceptance, allowing people to miss who you were while trusting that the ones meant to stay will learn to appreciate who you are now, not as a replacement for the past, but as the natural unfolding of a life that was never meant to remain the same. As you allowed people to hold their memories without returning to the person they remembered, something inside you began to relax in a way you had not expected. You realized how much energy had been spent trying to explain your changes, translating your inner shifts into words that others could understand, offering updates so no one would feel left behind. But the more you grew, the more exhausting this became. Some transformations were too subtle to describe. Some realizations lost their clarity the moment you tried to explain them. Slowly, you began to see that not every part of your journey needed witnesses. Some changes were meant to be lived quietly,
without announcement. There is a profound peace that comes when you stop updating everyone about your inner world. For much of life, sharing feels like connection. You tell people what you are going through so they can understand you, support you, or validate your experience. But constant explanation can also create pressure, turning personal growth into something that must be justified or interpreted by others. When you release this obligation, your experiences regain their intimacy. You are no longer performing your evolution for an audience. You are simply living it. This shift can feel unfamiliar at first, because it removes the reassurance that comes from being understood. Yet it also removes the vulnerability of being misunderstood. Buddhist teachings often emphasize the value of silence, not as avoidance but as clarity. Words can distort experiences that are meant to be felt directly. By allowing your inner life to remain private, you protect its authenticity. You give yourself space to process without interference. You may notice that many conversations about personal growth invite comparison or advice that does not align with your path. People interpret your experiences through their own beliefs, offering solutions to problems you have already outgrown. Without intending harm, they can pull you back into perspectives that no longer resonate. Keeping parts of your journey private reduces this influence. You listen more to your own understanding rather than to external interpretations. This does not mean isolating yourself. It means choosing carefully when and with whom to share. There is also freedom in not needing to narrate your progress. Growth does not have to be documented to be real. Some of the most meaningful changes happen quietly, without visible milestones. When you stop seeking acknowledgement, you allow these changes to unfold naturally. You may still share selectively, offering glimpses of your experience to those who can hold it with respect. These moments of openness feel deeper because they are not driven by obligation, but by genuine connection. Silence can also reveal how much of your identity was tied to being known. When you stop updating others, you face the question of who you are without constant reflection from outside. This question leads you back to yourself, encouraging a more direct relationship with your own thoughts and emotions. There can be discomfort in realizing that not everyone needs to understand you fully. You might worry that distance will grow, that relationships will weaken without constant sharing. In reality, connections often become calmer because they are no longer strained by the need for explanation. Buddhism teaches that attachment to recognition creates suffering. Wanting others to see your inner world clearly can lead to frustration when they cannot. Releasing this expectation allows you to accept people as they are, without demanding perfect understanding. You may discover that your energy becomes more stable when it is not dispersed through constant communication. Thoughts settle more easily. Emotions move through you without needing commentary. Reflection deepens because it is not interrupted by the need to articulate. There is also a sense of protection in privacy. Your inner life becomes a sanctuary rather than a public space. You choose what enters and what remains within. This boundary supports emotional resilience. You might notice that you become a better listener when you are not focused on explaining yourself. Conversations shift from self-disclosure to genuine curiosity about others. This change enriches relationships in unexpected ways. Over time, you realize that silence does not equal secrecy. You are not hiding your life. You are simply not narrating every detail. What matters reveals itself through your actions, your calmness, your presence. There can still be moments when you feel the urge to share, especially during intense experiences. Pausing before speaking allows you to discern whether sharing will deepen understanding or dilute the experience. Sometimes the most compassionate choice is to keep something sacred. You may also observe that when you stop updating everyone, those who truly care will notice your changes without needing explanations. They respond to your energy rather than to your words. This recognition feels more genuine because it arises naturally, The peace that emerges from this practice is quiet but steady. It comes from knowing that your growth does not depend on acknowledgement. You trust your experience without needing external confirmation. Eventually, you see that your inner world is not a story to be broadcast, but a landscape to be explored. You move through it with curiosity, patience, and respect, allowing its depths to reveal themselves in their own time. And from that place of quiet self-trust, you continue your journey without the pressure to keep everyone informed, understanding that true connection does not require constant updates. It requires presence, authenticity, and the freedom to let some parts of your life remain beautifully unseen. The person they remember was real, but not permanent. You were never meant to stay frozen in a single chapter of your life. Every loss, every awakening, every quiet realization reshaped you until the old identity could no longer hold who you were becoming. This journey was not about abandoning your past, but about releasing the weight of carrying it forever. Growth asked you to walk forward even when others were still calling you by an old name, still expecting an old reaction, still loving a version of you that had already dissolved. And through all of it, you learned something deeper than change. You learned that peace comes when you stop asking permission to evolve. If this message found you at the exact moment you needed it, write, "I have changed" in the comments. It's not for anyone else. It's a quiet promise to yourself that you will not shrink back into who you used to be just to make others comfortable. If you want more teachings that help you grow quietly, heal deeply, and move through life with calm strength, subscribe to the channel and join this journey. Your next chapter is already unfolding.